Hola, mother bitches. I'm speaking and you guys can hear me on the mic. Did you turn the camera on? Are we recording this? Oh man, that's why you turn the lights on. No, it's fine. I just put my medicine on though, but it's okay. No, it's good. I was just like glaring. It's gonna look like I got my soul glow on. BigRia.com presents the world's only guide to quantum physics for real estate investors. That's what we should call it. The world's only guide. The world's only guide to quantum physics for real estate investors. Understanding the double slit experiment and how consciousness shapes reality. How many people are familiar with the double slit experiment? Okay, so if you're not, this is going to be the most mind-blowing class and stuff you've ever heard in your life. I'm serious. So it's important that, and especially, yeah, you can close that door. Thank you. That if you have any questions, no matter how long it takes, I'm going to go through this. And if I look at the screen, are you guys seeing me on the screen as well? No? Yeah? You are? Is the law of attraction real? These are your headlines? Okay. No, it's good. Keep it in. Is the law of attraction real? New science breakthrough may have the answer. Yeah, that's a good head. That's like a conservative, that'd be like Reader's Digest, the cover Reader's Digest. Okay. Is the law of attraction real? New science breakthrough may have the answer. Is the law of attraction real? Question mark. Yeah, this is perfect for what you're trying, like the conservative kind of like, we are much more gaudy here, but that's a good, for what it is, that's a good one. The biggest mystery in the universe, it even stumped, the biggest mystery in the universe, it even stumped Einstein. These are all example titles, right, of the class? Yeah, okay. The biggest mystery in the universe, it even stumped Einstein, and how this is the biggest obstacle between you and owning an apartment building, zero down, that makes you 30 grand a month. Okay, I like what you're doing about the different size text. Who wrote this? Is he here? Okay, good stuff. The other one's good too. All good stuff. The biggest mystery in the universe, it even stumped Einstein. And how this is the biggest obstacle between you and owning an apartment building, zero down, that makes you 30 grand a month. This kind of, it's good. It's great. Good. First of all, good job. I'm only giving you like constructive, like what I would change. The things like the different size text is good. And the bolding, you always should have a reason why you're bolding things, right? So the biggest obstacle is, whenever we can bold a verb, that's better. So like owning an apartment building, zero down can kind of be a verb. But I don't know if we need the zero down. The biggest mystery in the universe, it even stumped Einstein, and how this is the biggest obstacle between you and owning an apartment building that makes you 30 grand a month. You see how if we take out the zero down, it still works? Or own an apartment, zero down, ... 30 grand a month, ... zero down with no money. The biggest mystery in the universe. Mystery is good. It's good that that's bolded, because that's, whenever we can use words like that, that's good. But so I would probably take that out, because that way if we have one thing, it even stumped Einstein. If that's smaller, then if that's the only thing that's small, then it doesn't break it up as much. You get what I'm saying? But that's good. It's good. Are there more? Okay, at the South Pole, thousands of feet below the surface, there is a square block of ice 1 mile wide. This is good. At the South Pole, thousands of feet below the surface, there's a square block of ice 1 mile wide. At the south, I really like this. I really like the setup. I'm not even reading the rest of it. At the South Pole, thousands of feet below the surface, there's a square block of ice 1 mile wide. I really don't have, I just hope you don't screw it up at the rest of it. Okay. ... and the ellipses, then ... When scientists drilled into it, they found a parallel universe that holds the world's biggest secret about real estate investing. Okay. So, it's not like exactly true, right? You know that. Okay, right. Minor detail. But this is how to start. Remember we were talking about Steve Jobs earlier. Start with the user experience. Start with, even if it's BS, even if it's not real, start with that, and then we can work our way backwards. Don't start like Steve Jobs used to say, don't start where the technology is and then try to figure out how people can use it. Start with the end experience, what you want the user to have. I need to start looking at the camera more. And then what you want the user to have, and then work backwards. You guys can see me when I'm doing that, right? Okay. So this is a good one. The beginning is beautiful. At the South Pole, thousands of feet below the surface, there's a square block of ice 1 mile wide. It's actually 1 kilometer, but yeah, you're talking about ice cube, right? Yeah, when scientists drilled into it, they found a parallel universe. Well, the parallel, you're talking about the neutrinos, right? Because that's what we found a neutrino. You guys are familiar with the neutrinos. We'll talk more about that later. It came up from the bottom, and there's evidence that it's linking to a parallel universe where time runs backwards, by the way. It's like Tenet, where the Big Bang Theory, we're moving towards it, or we're moving away from it, and that universe, they're moving towards it. What? Yes. So they've only got like a couple billion years left. A parallel universe that holds the world's biggest secret about real estate investing. Okay, so we're not even going to get into the parallel universe thing. Of course, that's not exactly true. But the thing about the world's biggest secret about real estate, we have to have something more solid there. How does that hold the secret to you? I guess what would be the what is the secret? What are you doing specifically? Are you making what would you say? What result do you have because of that the neutrino study that you wouldn't have normally? Is it you're talking about Airbnb? So how much would you make on Airbnb? See, that would be more specific. If we said when scientists drilled into it, they found a parallel universe. Again, that's not exactly true, but let's say that we massage that parallel universe that holds the world's biggest secret on how you can rent a house out on Airbnb for how you can rent a house out for $5,000. How you can take a house that rents for $1,000. How you can rent a house out for 5 times as much money, right? Or how they found a parallel universe that holds a secret to renting a house out for $7,000 when it rents for $1,100 a month or whatever. You get what I'm saying? Something specific. Or it holds the secret that, and this is how I've been able to rent a house out that rents for $1,200 a month, and I'm able to rent it out for $5,000 a month or whatever. You get what I'm saying? So something specific instead of the world's biggest secret about real estate investing. That's what I would add to it. Especially, I'm not even getting into the fact that we want to actually go back into it. We can put that a little bit better so it's more accurate. A parallel universe where time runs backwards. That's even better to include here, right? We'll talk more about that later. Okay, World's Luckiest Man reveals, I have the golden touch, and here's how anybody can get it too. The man who won the lottery 7 times says it wasn't an accident and finally spills the beans under oath. Okay, great example, use it under oath, right? We talked about this with a gun to my head, with a gun to his head, he gave the secrets out, right? So this is an example of, remember our 3 modes of authority. I'm smarter than you, I know people smarter than you, or I'm getting smarter than you. You need to have one of these 3 things in order for people to have to give you authority. Authority is given, never taken, so the only authority that lasts. So we have to have one of those. What is this one? This is, I know people smarter than you, right? Because I know the world's luckiest man. The man who won the lottery 7 times says it wasn't an accident and finally spills the beans under oath with a gun to his head or that's good. There's something about this though. The world's luckiest man reveals, I have the golden touch and here's how anybody can get it too. See, that's a problem. Like did he actually say that, by the way? Under interrogation or something? Okay. All right. Oh, so he did. Oh, he said something. Right. Okay, so the idea here is think about Neo. Always think about the Matrix. When do we find out that Neo's the one? We're freaking out the whole movie like, oh, is he one? Is he the one? Is he not the one? One of the best scenes in that movie is when Morpheus, when the machines are trying to avoid the whole movie, finally they break into the machine, they break into the ship, and they're burning it down. And he's just sitting there motionless. Why? Because Neo just died. And he thinks he might not be the one. That's how much stock Neo or Morpheus has in the fact that Neo has to be the one. Neo must be the one, right? And then, of course, he gets up. We realize he is the one. But how soon does the movie end after that? It's like 30 seconds. I think it's like 90 seconds, less than 3 minutes. And that is because once you get there, the story's over. The story is on how I got there. So I have the golden touch. It could be better with, I was voted the most unlucky person in high school. Is that true? Well, was he? Okay. Well, whatever. Something like that. Like because we want to talk the story. Here's how I got the golden touch on a regular October day. This is, I realized that I had the golden touch or whatever, and here's how anybody else is going to do. You get what I'm saying? Let's not start with the end of the story. Let's have him take us through the journey and how he got there, because that's the interesting thing, how they got there, right? Titanic is a great example. We know what's going to happen, but why did it do so well? Because we don't want it to happen. And that's what a genius filmmaker can do, a great storyteller. You know what's going to happen, but you're hoping that it doesn't happen, right? So you know the ending. So it's a story on how they got there. So that's what I would start with there. Silicon Valley millionaire trains special needs business owners to become overnight millionaires by making them draw this one picture. Holy smokes. That's a good one. I went right through it and I got it all. Silicon Valley millionaire trains special needs business owners to become overnight millionaires by making them draw this one picture. Who would? Oh, that's why I like it. It's me. So this is a good one. This is a really good one. Silicon Valley millionaire trains special needs business owners to become overnight millionaires by making them draw this one picture. That's really good. Okay, those are the headlines anymore? Okay, so all those are examples of what we're going to talk about today. Understand the double slit experiment, how consciousness shapes reality. You may have heard of the law of attraction. Movies like The Secret, What the Bleep Do We Know? What's the science behind that stuff? Really think about it this way. If you really believe that what you thought about would come about, if you really believe that 100%, how different would your life be? right? You would track your thoughts, like you would make sure you got out of bed and you started thinking about money or, very attractive people that look like me, basically. You'd be thinking of you'd be thinking of all this, like all these hot things, not just like physically or sexually, but like you'd be thinking about all these things you want to come in your life and how you can make them happen, right? But that's not how we are, right? So on some level, you may not put that much stock into it. But today we're going to talk about not the opinion stuff, because this is like UFO stuff. The UFOs, there's no doubt that they exist, that we have made contact. There's no doubt about that. Anyone's done any kind of research knows that. And I'm telling you this as someone who's worked in the intelligence community. I can tell you there's no doubt that contact has been made. We know about it. And one of the best, the DOD officials said, when they were talking about threat assessments, they said it would be a matter of minutes, or not minutes, but seconds. That's how quickly the war would be over if they're so beyond us, But the thing is, if you look into that world, you start coming across a bunch of weirdos and freaks, and it's almost like by design, because then they throw the normal people off, kind of throw people off the scent. The same thing happens when you look at the law of attraction. You get around a bunch of weirdos and people. So today we're going to go through all that stuff and just look at the science, the facts. What real estate investors, business owners, entrepreneurs need to know about quantum physics to improve the world. There's never been a time where changing the world is easier and more profitable than right now. The planet needs the BigRia.com skills of income ascension more now than ever. So here's the one thing you need to do to start improving lives and create generational impacts. Is this the same thing? Okay, it says here's the one thing you need to do to start improving lives and create generational impacts. Oh, these are different colors. I see. Not so gaudy. Yeah, I like them all. This is a good one. Black, red, and white. Yeah, it's good. So this is the one thing you need to do to start improving lives and create generational impacts. What's that one thing? Okay. Oh, we're going to find out. Oh, it's the whole thing? Okay. The double slit experiment. Okay. By the time we're done here, here's all the stuff we're going to cover, right? So get ready for all this stuff. We're going to jam it in, no matter how long it takes. And make sure, if there's any questions at all, ask me. I'll go over this 1,000 times, 1 trillion times. I got my whiteboard here. You guys can see all this stuff, right? Okay, you don't just see me, you see the actual screen, right? Yeah, okay. Double slit experiment. You're going to understand the entire process. You're going to understand wave-particle duality, the RAS, the reticular activating system, quantum entanglement, faster than the speed of light, FML possibilities, the time octopus, neutrinos, the parallel universe with inverse time. We already talked a little bit about that. The big secret, the huge, big, ginormous, the giant secret, the biggest secret in the world potentially ever, the great experiment that has to do with that. Observation versus consciousness, amplitude, wavelength, Hertz calculations, vibration, resonance, ice cube and other dimensions, cataloging neurofeedback and neuroplasticity, Xeno Effect of freezing time, Higgs boson field, should be field, right? Time dilation, Terman study, particle versus interference patterns, delayed choice experiment, quantum eraser, neurobrain wave classification, marshmallow experiment, neurotransmitters, theory of relativity, measure frequency from wavelengths, the color that doesn't exist, like attracts like. It's in the CMYK, by the way. If you've ever worked at a print store, you've relied on the color that doesn't exist. Magenta. But the color that doesn't exist, like attracts like, frequency of thought, LOA, in depth, the Mail-Brooks spectrum explained in detail the exact spectrum that we are evolving, what we came up with initially, Anna and I, to work with special needs people. All this stuff we're going to talk about today. And more, plus how to use it all to benefit and grow your real estate business. Okay. Years ago, I learned about this. It changed my life. It got me excited about physics, put me on a path. I'm not an expert, and I'm still learning, so please advise. I had something to do with this. Some of these slides I did add. So this was, I'm still learning, so please advise. There's much more to learn here, but the universe is a core item. So that's good that you included that. I don't know which ones. Okay, so this is the double slit experiment. The biggest mystery in the universe, really. This is the core of all the stuff that people talk about. This is the core. Again, it's super important you understand exactly what we're talking about. So let's say you take a flashlight against a screen, okay? So you put a screen, but between you and the screen is another wall, and in that wall you have a tiny little slit, right? So what are you gonna see? And for those of you that have looked, actually we have this in the cardboard box. You can actually go look at this double slit experiment and see this exact same thing. So here's what happens. You have a flashlight. You put that flashlight and there's a slit right there, and you put a slit. What are you gonna see on the wall? That's the question. What are you gonna see over here? That's what we wanna know, right? So if I have this little slit, what happens? As you can guess, you get a vertical line, right? Because the light goes through here. This basically becomes like a flashlight. It becomes its own little source of light, and then it actually goes like a narrow little beam. And there's one beam here, and then it actually, diffuses. The further away you get from the center, right? the less intense it becomes. So basically, you have one line, right? Now, the question then becomes, what if you put two slits in there? If you have two slits in this wall, what do you get? What do you get if you get a double slit? Now, what most people think that you would get, right, is that you would get something like that. You would get two lines, two main, rays of focus that would be in parallel somewhat to this initial slit. That's what you think you would get, right? And in the cardboard box, by the way, you could do this for yourself. First, cover that first slit, and you're going to see one narrow slit. And then when you look in, you think you're going to see, we always ask me, what do you think you're going to see if I have two slits? So imagine I have a piece of a cardboard box, and I have a light, basically any source of light. It could be, light that's just shining just in the room, right? And I have someone look in the box, and with one vertical slit, I ask them, what are you going to see? The person's like, I'm going to see one vertical slit. Then I say, okay, now I'm going to uncover this other vertical slit right next to it. What are you going to see? They say, I'm going to see two vertical slits. That's what everyone says, right? That's not what you see. You expect to see what's called a particle pattern. So imagine that we're using sand. If we're pouring sand down here, we pour sand vertically, what would happen? You would get two equal, as you pour more sand, you would get two equal patterns here. This is called a particle pattern. This is what we expect. The sand comes down here and it comes down here. And we would get two little piles of sand. Make sense? That's what we expect. This 100% makes sense, right? Okay, good. So you expect a particle pattern, but in reality, what happens is that you get this. This is what you get. It's called an interference pattern. In other words, instead of getting one line, you get this ray of lines that are broken up with black bars. So this is called an interference pattern. Why is it called an interference pattern? Because these waves interfere with each other. So you have one source of light and two sources of light, and they act like little waves, right? And so they interfere with each other. And when they interfere with each other, you have constructive and deconstructive or deconstructive interference. Basically what happens is when these guys meet here, then nothing happens, right? But when the peaks meet together, then you have something that shows up. This is what's called an interference pattern. So it looks something like that. So when that hits the wall right here and here, there's not going to be anything. But here and here, there's going to be something. Does that make sense? Make sense? Yeah? Okay. So what we've got here is a particle versus wave. We know what a particle pattern looks like, where you would have two piles, right? But this is an interference pattern. And then we have constructive, destructive interference. Does that make sense? So this totally makes sense, right? Because we think that we're going to see we think we're going to see a particle pattern, but instead we see an interference pattern. So this is what the interference pattern looks like. This is first done in 1801. See, this is B, slit B. Look at this first wave right here. You see that? And the second wave, the third wave. You guys see that? This is the first wave, second wave, third wave, fourth wave, right? So these two waves, A and B right here, they don't connect, right? So they don't connect until like this guy goes out, 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 out. You guys see where the B waves are going out. They get right. And we see where the A waves go. And so when these connect, just look right here. Just draw a vertical line in your mind right here. Because imagine this is a wall. We see when right here, we're not going to have anything because it's just going to be a black bar. When the bottom of one wave connects to the bottom of another, they cancel each other out. But when the top of the wave connects to the top of another wave, then we're actually going to hit something there, right? So here is what it looks like, a bigger picture. Imagine this is the wall right here. That's why we get that pattern where it's one long vertical bar, but a bunch of black bars in between, right? Because it's interfering. We have two different patterns coming out of there. Is this totally clear? I know it may seem like I'm going over this, like to make it, but this is super important. You get this wave, this pattern. This is called an interference pattern. It's really important you understand this because it's about to go totally bonkers, right? But this is what's called an interference pattern. What we expect to see is just vertical lines that come out of here and hit that wall, right? That's what you expect to see in the cardboard box, but that's not what you see. This is what you see. You see the result of this. Make sense? Okay, and here's another example of it. So imagine this right here. This is one slit, two slits. You see this is one wave, two waves, and what happens is they go and they connect. This is how we get that particle or that interference pattern on the wall versus we would expect just to see a particle pattern. We expect to see the particle pattern. That's where you see two piles of sand, right? But instead, you see this bonkers interference pattern, which is kind of weird. It's like these waves are colliding with each other. It's a little bit bizarre. But the plot thickens. Okay, so quick check. Everyone understands everything we just said so far, right? Yes? Okay. Right, this is right. Yeah, just stick with where we're at right now. So we're going to get to the other stuff because I know we went through this earlier, but it's important that you will go step by step, and I'll draw this out if we need to with our board as well. Make sense? Okay, so let's move on. This is a single slit pattern right here. When you have one slit, right here is the intensity. If I just shine a light at the wall, there's intensity in the center, and as I move away from the center, the intensity lessens, right? The strength of that ray of light diminishes, right? But when we have a double slit pattern, this is where you've got all these little black bars here because of that interference pattern. Make sense? Okay, so now we're going to do something a little bit bonkers. We're going to take electrons. We're going to shoot electrons, right? Electrons, photons, protons, atoms. We're going to start shooting atomic and subatomic particles out of this gun. It just does that. Don't worry about it. You were asking me earlier. It's a special kind of gun. So we're going to shoot electrons. And whether we shoot one or we shoot a number of them, we're going to see some interesting things start to happen because we see that we understand the difference between a particle pattern and a interference pattern, right? We understand exactly what each of those things means, right? Right. It's a gun. It's a gun. So it shoots these particle patterns. It's going to shoot these electrons, okay? So here's what we're going to do. We have one slit right now, and what do we get? When we shoot one slit, we shoot the gun, and we have one slit, we end up with getting a particle pattern, right? With one slit open, we get the expected particle pattern, right? They go from here and they go straight over there and they create a particle pattern. Now, what should we get if we have two slits? If we shoot just one at a time, instead of shooting an array of electrons, right? Because a ray of light is, millions or trillions of photons at once, right? But instead of that, let's just shoot one at a time. What happens? Because there shouldn't be any interference, right? So we should get a particle pattern if we have two slits open, right? We shoot one electron. We just showed you what happened, how it's going to be a particle pattern. If we shoot one electron right now, the electron's going to have to go over the top or the bottom, and it's going to create a particle pattern. We think, right? That's what we should get, right? But, right, what should we get? If we shoot just one at a time, since there's no interference, we should get a particle pattern. They should go completely in parallel here, right? When I shoot an electron, it should go through this or this guy, and it should just go straight and hit the wall straight, right? Well, that's what it should look like, right? Every time we shoot an electron, right? But instead, we get this. When you shoot one at a time, you get this pattern. Or if you shoot multiple at a time, you get this pattern. Because what happened is we started shooting several at once, and it started getting us this interference pattern. We thought maybe the electrons are going through both slits, and then they're interfering with each other. So let's just shoot one electron at a time. And when we shot one at a time, we still get this interference pattern, which makes no sense. Do you get what I'm saying? Because it's almost like the electron is going through both, or it's going through the top slit or the bottom one, and it's going through both of them at the same time, and then it's interfering with itself, right? But the other crazy part about this is that when we shoot one at a time, we should get, the particle pattern, right? Okay, right, that's what I just said, right? So it goes through both, and then it interferes with itself. Does that make sense? When you shoot one electron, you should get the particle pattern, or you should get the particle pattern. This is why we call it the particle duality, right? Because it's a particle or a wave. Because this is the interference wave pattern. The interference pattern is a pattern of a wave. So is light, or is this electron, is it acting like a particle or is it acting like a wave? Because imagine this is water coming out of here, like water waves. If if you're in the bathtub and you push water against the wall, if you do it with both hands at the same time, you're going to end up getting the water is going to hit the wall in an interference pattern because each of the waves are going to interfere with each other. You get what I'm saying? So when we shot one electron at a time, and we go through here, the electron goes through both of them. It's almost like it goes through both of them, and then it interferes with itself, and it creates a particle pattern. You guys creates an interference pattern. You understand why it's so bizarre that even when we shoot one electron at a time, does that make sense? It's when we shoot one at a time, it creates the interference pattern, which makes no sense because there's nothing for it to interfere with, right? So the question is, which slit did it go through? Did it go through the top, or did it go through the bottom, or did it go through both? There was like this huge mystery, right? Because it didn't make any sense. But the other crazy thing is that when you shoot a single electron, when it lands on the wall, it lands on the wall in a way that is consistent with the last one and the previous ones. They end up coming in clusters. So you don't get ones over here or over here in between. The black bar stays the same. This is like pretty bonkers and pretty like almost like romantic, because it has to do with quantum entanglement in some ways. Why is it that when you shoot that, those black bars that are in between the light, if you shot one photon at a time, all light is just photons, right? But if you shot one photon at a time and it created that interference pattern, you would think that it would just cover the wall. Why is it that one electron, one photon, somehow knows where to land? You get what I'm saying? Where the other ones are going to land before or after it. How does the first one, how do any of them know where to land? It's almost like they know where the other ones are going to land. Like there's some form of communication where they know how do they create, it's like, it's really, you guys get what I'm saying? It's really they're creating this pattern. Even when you shoot one electron at a time, it's as if they have some form of communication. So the question is, how is this happening? Why is it that we're creating this interference pattern on the wall? How is this wave? How is it interfering with each other? Also notice how each electron somehow knows where to land. Perfect, exactly the summary. That's what I just said about when they create this wave particle, when they create the wave pattern and not the particle pattern, which we haven't even talked about yet, but we'll get there in a second. But when they're creating this wave pattern, why do they know where to go? You guys get what I'm saying? Does that make sense? Okay, so it's totally clear, right? Okay, so now the question is, what's the mystery, right? Exactly. Which slit does it go through? So we have to have a way to do that. So what's the way of doing that? We're going to use, the question is, which slit does it go through? We're going to use a camera. Remember when I said there are 3 parts of this life-changing, bonkers, brilliant? Okay, so you guys understand everything so far? The first thing is what happens when you open that second slit. That's the first bonkers thing. This is the second one, the second big thing. There's 3 big things. This is the second one. What happens when we look to see which slit that the electron went through? So the question here is, which slit does the electron go through? So what we do is we install a camera. We set up a little bit of a detector. This is called the which way info. This is a really important term, which way info. The which slit did the electron go through? We're going to set up a little detector. We're going to set it up on this top one, right? So the idea is if we shoot an electron, if we shoot 100 electrons, on average about 50 of them should go through the top, right? And then we can say because 50 went through the top, then the other 50 went through the bottom. This is how we can determine which slit the electron went through, and that way we can figure out how it's creating that interference pattern, okay? So about 50% of the time we did that, that's what happened. That when we're measuring when we shoot it, about 50% of the time it went through the top up here, about 50% it went, well, we didn't track the bottom one, but we assume it went through the bottom one because it still got to the wall. And the only way to get to the wall is to go through one of these 2 slits, right? Okay, so what happens when we track that 50% of them went up to the top and 50% went to the bottom? What are we going to get on the other side? This is the bonkers part, right? You would think we'd get the interference pattern because that's what we kept getting. But no, we get the particle pattern. This is the double slit experiment. Does that make sense? When we look at it, it behaves like a particle. That's the whole point. As soon as we look at it, it starts acting like, okay, now we're being watched. The atoms, the electrons, the photons, the protons, everything, they all somehow know that they're being watched. They act differently when they are observed. Does that make sense? So as soon as we look to see which slit does it go through, well, then it goes through one or the other, and it creates the pattern as if it went through one or the other. Does that make sense? The observance alone, or the consciousness, which we'll talk about in a second, but the observance alone changes how these electrons act, right? So some people think, well, what happened is that we disturbed it. When we set up that detector, we disturbed the paths. So when these electrons are coming, it somehow interferes with them, and that's why they're creating this particle pattern. So they said, you know what? All we're going to do is we're going to keep it there. Let's just go unplug it. Let's just go unplug this detector so it doesn't work. And guess what happens when you unplug it and you send an electron through? Do you know what happens? We get the interference pattern. When you leave it in the same exact place, which even if that was an excuse, which it's not, but if you leave it in the same place, once it's not observed, it acts like a wave pattern. Does that make sense? It acts like not like the particle. It acts like the wave. Whether or not we look to see which slit it goes through. So when we're not looking, it appears like it goes through both slits at the same time, and it interferes with itself, and it creates this interference pattern, and not the particle pattern. Does this make sense? I mean, of course it doesn't make sense, but do you guys follow what's happening here? Whether we look or not, whether we actually physically look at it, determines what happens. So if we look, we get the particle pattern, right? If we don't look, we get the wave pattern. This is called the wave-particle duality. This is that process we're talking about. This is the wave duality particle of basically everything. Everything essentially is a wave or a particle depending on our focus, on what we look at. So there's all kinds of extrapolations that can be made from this, but the fact is, I want to stick to the facts. This is called the double slit experiment. Whether or not we observe which slit they go through, it determines how they act on the other side. Whether or not they are a particle or a wave is determined by looking or not looking. Does that make sense? Whether or not the data is being recorded. If we look at the which way info, then we get the which way info. If we don't look at it, we get this inexplicable pattern. The thing is that our consciousness, the observance alone, is, in this very real case, creating a reality. It is 100% done through the observance alone. Does that make sense? It's really important to understand that the facts on the ground for this concept, because there's a lot that's been taken out of this, but this is the double slit experiment and how it works. Does that make sense? Does that make total sense? We look, we get the particle pattern. We don't look, we have the wave. A lot of people have talked about this. What does this all mean? So the focus alone has a provable impact on reality. That's absolute. Again, I know it sounds crazy, but this is absolutely true. What we can take away from the double slit experiment is that one's focus, or consciousness versus observation, which is a huge debate I've had for many, many hours on end. But consciousness or observance actually it is deterministic. It determines reality. It determines what happens in the real world. Does that make sense? All right. So it stands to reason. So if your focus alone has a provable impact on reality, if consciousness determines reality, then it stands. And whenever I'm going to introduce my opinion or like my stuff or like experiments we're doing, I'm going to make it clear that we're moving past science, right? But right now, everything I just said is 100% science, and that is how it works out. So it stands to reason that the same consciousness can create reality, right? That's at least the idea behind this. Is like some of the ideas that people have taken from this. Thinking about something alone makes it so. Is that right? Is that what we just learned? Is that what we learned? This has led to many wild interpretations of the law of attraction, LOA. Does this prove the law of attraction? Everything is made of atoms, and atoms know when they're being watched, and they react to conscious thought. So that stands to reason that your thoughts alone have effect on reality. Do your thoughts alone create the universe? These are all these like kind of questions that people take what we just talked about and they add all kinds of stuff to it. But we want to stick to just the science and just what we can provably see and what we're having done right now. Some of the results we're having right now. I base everything on a predictable result, predictable input, predictable output. So many physicists roll their eyes at a lot of the law of attraction stuff, the interpretation of manifesting. Like if a purist believes you could just go sit under a tree, think of a Ferrari, and one will just show up, The interpretation of manifesting has a whole bunch of problems. Movies like The Secret or Purists, there's also gaps in that stuff. What the Bleep Do We Know? Other movies like that, which I love. I'm not putting them down. I'm just saying there are gaps in that stuff. And the idea, it's kind of ironic that I'm speaking to groups like, our heroes, given the fact, like, if you have stage 4 cancer, did you manifest that? Like, how do you explain that? And I'll just tell you right now, stuff like that, I don't know. I just know that what we're focusing on today is the power of thought and what we can track, the results that our thoughts we can provably track. We will only focus on the science and proven data. Okay, so here are the explanations for the double slit experiment. Nobody knows for sure how it works or how it happened, but here are some of the examples. So there's not really a full explanation. It's been a big mystery, but there's a lot of ideas. So one is called the wave-particle duality. This is called the wave-particle duality of matter, of light, or whatever, that it is a wave or a particle based on whether or not you look at it. So Thomas Young first came with this, the theory of light and colors. There's a whole bunch of ideas that he had, but this was the core idea. This was way back about 220 years ago. So this has been around for a long time. No one's figured it out. The accepted explanation of this is the Copenhagen interpretation, or the Copenhagen experiment. And it has basically, this is the idea, this is really the core idea we want to take away from this, that when you look at the electron, it is not, you won't really see the electron. What you see is a wave of probability of the different places where the electron could be. And what changes where it ends up being is what you look at. So your focus, the consciousness of looking at it, actually collapses all those realities. This is called, also there's a Schrodinger's cat, this whole analogy of there's a box with a cat in it, and we think, is the cat either dead or alive? We think in terms of binary, ones and zeros, that the cat's either dead or alive. But there's something called superposition in the world of quantum, which means it could be both dead and alive. It could be a 1 and a 0 at the same time. These probabilities all exist, but they collapse once you look. Once you open the box, the cat's going to be either dead or alive. Those realities collapse. This is the most agreed upon explanation. And even in this explanation, think about what we're saying. that this is exactly how we came up with the spectrum when Anna and I started working on this, that you have a possibility of doing LC stuff or doing badass stuff. But what changes, what creates those possibilities, what collapses them into the reality of this universe or whatever? And that is your focus. Your thoughts alone collapse reality from a series of probabilities, a probability wave, into what is actually real. And this idea, we're going to talk a whole lot more about this idea, about how your focus itself is collapsing. And again, I want to be clear, you should spend a lot of time looking this up, as I have, because it's, again, I always say this, if it were true, if you actually believed that your thoughts controlled your reality, if they really had that much of an impact, you would be super careful. You would never watch the news, for example. I would never have to talk you out of watching the news. You would make sure that you stayed in the right place, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, all that stuff. It would never happen again. There's another explanation on this, another idea called biocentrism. Robert Lanza is a really brilliant guy. He worked under, he had a whole bunch of the polio vaccine. The doctor, he was the assistant, I believe, to the professor with that. This guy's got some really great stuff on this, but his whole idea is that your consciousness does actually create it. He has some crazy bonkers ideas, but he's one of the most brilliant people on this subject. You could check out his book on biocentrism. It's actually in the recommended reading, because it's really crazy how he talks about how many examples there are of actual consciousness manifesting, actually creating physically. The more you do it, the more atoms gather around these thoughts in the physical world, and your consciousness does actually create. As bonkers as that sounds, we know for sure that observation and consciousness affects reality. There's no question about that. And if you think this is crazy, wait till we get to the delayed choice quantum eraser, because it gets even crazier. There's the many worlds interpretation, the multiverse. This is what almost every physicist has some stock in and believes in, this idea of the multiverse. You can look more on this. Everett wrote a great book on this. This is an idea that there's like the number of universes that are currently existing. Einstein talked about this, is in the trillions, and there's trillions more added every second. Let's say you stop this video right now and go to the bathroom. There's a version of you that doesn't do that. Then there's a version of you that, goes and has a cigarette, because that version smokes, but you don't in this version. There's these multiverses, all these many worlds. And so as there's this wave of probability, there is a world where it's, like let's say you could go to the movies and there's 100 movies playing. There's a world where you watched each of those movies. There's like 100 different worlds. It's called the many worlds interpretation. And this idea is that when you look at the wave, it's in some world, that wave, the electron is in one of those positions, right? But when you focus and you look at it, then all those probabilities collapse to this universe, this reality, this world, and then that's where the electron ends up being. But on a subatomic level, like everything essentially is a series of possibilities, and where, depending on what you look at, basically determines what you experience, or the reality in this universe, this multiverse, this version of the multiverse. Does that make sense? I think about this a lot, the multiverse theory, that there's trillions of different versions of you. And I think about that when I get really pissed off at somebody, because I think, you know what? In another version, that's my son. That's my father. That's my, treat people with respect. And, just even if they're LCs, you gotta, maybe I'm an LC in another version, and I need someone to show me the light, right? Princeton professor, reality has versions. Basically, there's all these different versions. And when you look at, as soon as you look at something, all those versions collapse. There's also this whole idea of logical positivism or logical empiricism, empirical data. This is all the explanations, the most famous, most recognized, most well-known explanations of the double slit experiment. I'm doing this so that you understand how much time and effort by very smart people has gone into trying to explain this. Nobody has gotten to the answer. But also, the other part to that is that you understand that this really is these things all work in concert, right? Like the logical positivism, logical empiricism, empirical data. Basically, we want to focus on things that are either ones or zeros, things that are true or not true. And when they look at the double slit, for example, when they say the idea is that you can prove that until you can prove it's there, then it's not really there. The electrons, it's just a wave of probability, basically. But when you focus on one thing, that's what becomes a reality. But that also is there's some holes in that logic. But there's a lot to be said about what is the objective reality, right? When you talk about like logical positivism or absolute positivism, or when we talk about empirical data, what is the point of empirical data really? If we'll talk about the consciousness and the observation in a second. So this is by the Vienna Circle. There's a book on the Vienna Circle we can check out in the back. All of you guys, if you have any questions on this stuff, if you're, I really I could talk about this stuff all night, man. Truth usefulness must have verification is the whole point of logical positivism. In order for something to be true, it has to be provable. But this thing kind of collapses. Again, it's like Einstein said, we have that quote where he said, some of this explains some of it, but none of it explains all of it. So it's like you need part of this one, part of that one. It doesn't really explain it. But the one thing we know for sure, either way, the reality is dependent. Observation versus consciousness, the measurement problem, and there's another breakthrough we're going to talk about in a second. Observation versus consciousness. This is a huge issue. Basically, can you have observation without consciousness? Can you have consciousness without observation? This is a question I've posed to a lot of different people. It's a really fascinating question. Well, that depends right on how you look at it. So if you take, what he's saying, do you guys hear that? Yeah. Well, observance. So the whole point here, you guys, everyone understands exactly what's happening, right? The electron goes and it hits one slit once we look at it, right? And once we don't, this whole idea, all these interpretations basically say essentially the same thing, that there's a wave of probability of places the electron can be. There's 100 million trillion different things that could happen, but your focus alone is what changes it, what collapses those possibilities into what's reality. So observation versus consciousness, this is a whole big discussion. What is it that triggers that collapse of reality? Is it observation or consciousness? And what they would say, some people say it's observation, not necessarily consciousness. But I don't know if you can have observation without consciousness. Again, this is my own thing, and this isn't really settled, but I don't see, how could you, so the question of if a tree falls in a forest, does it make any noise if nobody's there to hear it? Well, what if you set your iPhone there and you record your iPhone? You record the noise on your iPhone. Now, did it make noise? Maybe, right? But how would you know unless you listen to the recording on your iPhone, right? So how can you have observation without consciousness? Unless there's something that knows that it's observing something, right? How can you have consciousness? About the opposite is true too. How can you have true consciousness without observation? And if you think you have it, then how do you know? Because you're not really observing anything, right? You have to know you're observing something, and you have to observe something. You get what I'm saying? Like the consciousness, I don't see the one example of this, because this whole issue comes down to the which way path. Well, once we know the which way path, once we know which slit that the electron went through, that is what triggers all the craziness or doesn't trigger it, right? So as long as we don't know that which way information, but then the question is, the measurement problem. This is what is measurement? Is it when you look at it? Is it, so when we have the detector set up, if the detector's set up, and is that the moment that observation is happening, or does it happen when someone looks at it? And if it's when someone looks at it, what is that? Is it when the photon, or is it when you actually look at it and that signal hits your retina? And then what if that retina goes, what if, the question here is, what is the whole idea of when do you measure? What do we call measurement? Is it when you get that signal into your retina, when you physically see it, or is it when your brain registers what that means, that we just figured out the which way information? Does that make sense? It sounds crazy, but this is super important because of what we're going to talk about next. We have to look at what we say, that another breakthrough. We're going to get into that in a second. But this idea of observation versus consciousness, there's one study that was done in 2011 where they took the which way information, which path it went through, that was stored in like an isotope or like an atom or something, and the atom was discarded. And in that example, they said, okay, that proves you don't need consciousness because an atom knew and then it discarded it. But if the universe has consciousness, then that doesn't prove that you don't need consciousness, right? Because then the universe knowing something is some consciousness knowing. This is super important because the question of whether you look at something, is it your focus, is it consciousness, or is it just something, some sort of observation? It's not clear yet. I believe that I don't see how you could have observation without consciousness, or consciousness. How do you know you're conscious if you're not observing something? But the measurement problem was a big deal, and this is to this day. When does it know that we're watching it, right? That's the whole question. Because we know that the electrons, the protons, they react to our consciousness, or they react to being watched. But how do they know? What is it that matters? What if we take the information and we discard it, for example? So we're going to get to that in a second here. Okay, so another breakthrough is coming. The MBS Spectrum lesson so far. So this is how we've come up with our spectrum. Basically, your focus actually determines what you see. This is pretty remarkable, right? We're going to talk more about this, but this really, when you look at it or you don't look at it, we know that there's a wave of possibility and they collapse based on what you look at. So the LC versus the badass is all probability of outcomes, right? It's all a probability. Maybe you'll work out, maybe you won't. Maybe you'll work on your business, maybe you won't. Maybe, there are these, we want to look at these things as a spectrum, and this is how we introduce all of our work. Whether you do these things or not, it's all on a spectrum, and it's all the chance of probability. What's the probability that you're going to work out and eat the right things or whatever today or tomorrow? What's the probability of that? It's all a matter of probability, but we can improve those with our focus. Thought control is the start of controlling all outcomes. If you look at what is the best version of yourself, what does that look like? What do you do? What do you eat? When do you wake up? How do you wake up? Those are the things we want to start populating our mind with, those thoughts, because thought control, and we're going to get a lot more into this whole thing, but basically I've said this to a point where I started looking into the other stuff we're going to talk about, the neurotherapy and talking to neurologists and stuff. We have a lot more to talk about, but I really understood this when we're working with our special needs heroes, but also when I first started with my son, when understanding what the power of thought control and what really happens. But this is the beginning of that. So we're starting to lay the groundwork for this. Okay, so what about this breakthrough that we're talking about? How do we know that when we measure the electron, we're not affecting it, that we're not affecting the path that it goes on? And can we test what happens if we look after? What if we look after the particle or wave has been established, right? So when we shoot an electron, it hits the wall. Is there a way for us to look after it hit the wall? Because we know that it decides whether or not it's a particle or a wave, depending on whether or not we look. But let's try to outsmart the atoms, right? Let's look after it actually goes through and hits the wall. So there's a study done. They created what's called the delayed choice quantum eraser experiment. This thing is pretty nuts. So I said there are three parts that are life-changing, bonkers, and brilliant, right? The first is what happens when you open that second slit, right? The second is what happens when we look through that slit, right? When we look to see, because the observance alone changes the outcome. It changes reality. That's the second thing. The third crazy thing is the delayed choice. What happens when we delay the choice? So basically, here's what's going to happen. We're going to take the electron, we're going to shoot it, and we're going to immediately split it into two. Now, technically, you can't split a photon, but you can create two photons that have half the frequency of the initial one, and they're what's called quantum entanglement. This is a whole other thing, what's called FML, faster than the speed of light communication. We don't think anything can be faster than the speed of light. Nothing that we know of is, of this world at least. But when you split these two things up, it's amazing. When something happens to one of them, the other one instantly knows, and the other one instantly reacts. And they could be hundreds or thousands of miles apart. This is also called like the twin flames or the soulmate idea, that there's one soul among two different bodies, or they're somehow connected, and we don't understand them. The whole multiverse theory I was talking about earlier, I do subscribe to that in some way. Part of me. And part of that theory is that there's constants and variables, meaning there's things, let's say there's a trillion versions of you out there. In every version, there's constants and variables. The variables are things that sometimes happen, but the constants are things that always happen. All trillion of those universes. I know for sure, for example, this and my work, as soon as I went through the adoption process and everything, I know that this is a constant. No matter how many versions there are of me out there, every single time, I find this work, the work we did with him, and we developed this spectrum. I know this is a part of what I was made, what I was made and what I was built to do. You should only do things that are like that for you, that are constants for you, that you know how many trillion times you go through this life, where if you repeat life or have another lives or past lives or the multiverse, no matter how many times you're supposed to be doing this. That's the kind of stuff you should be doing. Getting that deep current, connecting to the deep current. But that's also the idea of quantum entanglement, the idea that why are you drawn to certain things and not drawn to other things, right? And maybe if you live this 1,000 times, imagine if you saw yourself 1,000 different versions of yourself, and you always end up doing blank, right? You always end up, you doing some version of financial planning or whatever, right? Like, it'd be really crazy to think about that there is some sort of communication you have, there's an entanglement there that we don't really explain. Anyway, we're going to create that right now. So this is called the delayed choice quantum eraser. Here's how this works. We're going to take when the electron goes through slit A right here. You with me? You guys, everything's totally fine with everything we're saying, right? Okay. So when it goes through slit A, this is our prism right here, this black thing, right? So what happens is that it's going to split that photon. It's going to split that electron into two pieces, right? So we're not technically splitting it, but you know what I mean. So now these are quantum. We have quantum entanglement. This is a pair, And we know that we're going to have, anytime something happens on one, it registers on the other. But here's the crazy part, okay? So you really got to pay attention to this, all right? This is totally insane, okay? When it goes through slit A, right here, we shoot it and it hits the wall immediately, okay? We're absolutely sure about it. It's already hit the wall. And now we're going to bounce it around for a little bit, and sometimes we're going to check, sometimes we're not. But here's what we're going to do. So we know that it's already hit the wall. It's already decided whether or not it's a wave or a particle, okay? Makes sense? Now we take the other part of that and we send it through this prism that just all this does is bend it. It's not going to affect it in any way. And at first it goes here to what's called a half silvered mirror. What the half silver mirror means is that exactly half of the electrons are going to pass through it and the other half are going to bounce off into D4. This is like a little box that we're going to collect the electron in, okay? So half of them go through and half of them go up there. Now the ones that go through are going to go over here and they're going to hit a wall. When they hit that wall, they're going to come down and they're going to hit another half silvered mirror and they're going to go into D1. This is another like collection box, right? So check this out. Whenever the electron goes through slit A, immediately it hits the wall. Then we go down here. You guys are following this totally, right? It hits this silvered mirror. Half of them go through, half of them go up here. Then it hits this wall, and then the wall, what's that? Yeah, all of them go through and it hits the wall, right? So it hits the wall, every one of them go through, 100% of them go through. Now here, there's another half silver mirror. So half of the electrons go through, the other half go up here to D2, right? Does that make total sense? Is that totally clear? Because this is the important path here that we're looking at. Once it goes through A, we shoot it at the wall immediately, and then we take it down here through this little maze. So half of them go to D4, and then of the ones that hit this wall, half of those go to D1 and half of them go to D2. Does that make sense? Now let's do the same thing for the other slit, because that tells everything with A. We're totally clear, right? Now we're just going to do the same thing with B. So we're totally clear on this A, right? What's happening here? It's going through here, then it goes to D4, D2, or D1. Half of them go to D4, half of them go to D2 out of the remaining half, and then half of them go to D1. Does that make sense? So if you go through A, you're going to end up in D4, D2, or D1. Make sense? Okay, so now let's do the same thing with B. B comes in, we immediately shoot it at the wall, and it registers. We know whether or not it knows if it's a wave or a particle. We instantly determine that. And then we split it here. So we go back to the same prism, and when we go through this prism, we come down here, we send it down here through another half silvered mirror. Half of these go to D3, and the other half go through, and they hit a little wall right here. Now when they hit that wall, they come up here, and they hit that same half silver mirror from D1. So this one sends half of them down to D1. You get what I'm saying? I'm sorry, it hits that half silver mirror from the blue, the A electron. Does that make sense? And then half of those go to D1. Does this totally making sense? This is beautiful, man. I thought it'd be much more complicated. We'll go here. If it comes in from B, if the electron goes through slit B, we throw it up here. It's going to hit the wall. The other half of that quantum entanglement, the other half of that pair goes here, down here. It's going to hit that half silver mirror. Half of them are going to go to D3. The other half are going to go through and hit this wall. Does that make sense? Once they hit that wall, just like this other wall from slit A, if they hit this wall, all of the electrons are going to bounce up and they're going to hit this half silvered mirror. Then half of them are going to go to D1 and the other half are going to go, where are the other half going to go? Exactly. They go right through it. They go right through to D2. Because anytime we have a half silvered mirror, you know that the teleprompters, you look at a teleprompter, and if that mirror is at 45 degrees, you're looking through it, but you can see the reflection, right? You guys have seen that? That's how teleprompters work. That's essentially what a half silvered mirror is. Half of the photons are sent through, half of the light is sent through, half of it is deflected. That's exactly how a teleprompter, that's why you can look directly at the camera with the teleprompter, and it doesn't, the text doesn't go through. Because that half is, you get what I'm saying? So that's what the half silvered mirror is. This is what's called the delayed choice experiment. You get what I mean? Why is it called the delayed choice? Well, we are taking from slit A, right? And we're delaying whether or not we're going to look or not. Because check this out. If you look at D4, where did anything come from D4? You had to go through slit A, right? But what about D2? This is what's called the quantum eraser. We're not erasing it, but if we look in D2, we have no way of telling whether the electron went through slit A or slit B. The which way info is lost. Does that make sense? Now, if we come down here to D1, do we know the which way info for this? Absolutely. It comes from B. Now, what about if we look at D3? In D3, the which way info is lost because it could be from slit A or slit B. We don't know. Does that make sense? So the whole idea here is we're trying to outsmart the atoms. We're going to shoot the atoms, and then we're going to have it land and decide whether or not it's a wave or a particle. And then after the electron decides if it's a wave or a particle, then we're going to decide to look. You guys get what I'm saying? So this is completely nuts. So this, I've actually seen an example of this. My cousin had one at MIT, and you can walk up to it and cover it with your hand. You can put your hand over D1 and D4 and cover them with your hand, right? And when you're not looking, every one of these is a wave, right? Because we're not looking, we're not getting the which way info. Does that make sense? We're not determining it. Then if you uncover D1, all of a sudden, and this is the totally bonkers thing, what happens is that, and again, I want to make sure we're following this because what I'm about to say sounds totally crazy, especially if you've never heard this before. So it's super important. See, I got that medicine on, man. I got this, I didn't know we'd be shooting. Yeah. No, it's just this stuff acts up. Okay, so just to be totally clear here, it's super important that you're following what's happening here. If we go through slit A, right, we know that if we look through D4, it came through slit A. If we look in D1, it came through slit B. But here's the thing. If we look in D4, yes, the electron came from slit A, but it already decided whether or not it was a wave or a particle. You get what I'm saying? So as long as you don't look, everything is a wave, right? But the moment you look at D4, you know what happens? And this is the bonkers part, is that it goes back in time. This has totally changed how we look at space and time. It goes back in time and it becomes a particle. And even though it's only a few seconds, this delay is only a few seconds, the delayed choice is only a few seconds, this somehow alters the way we think about space and time. Because there's some really smart people that think, well, because we're detecting it when we put the camera, that's what determines. No. Even if you look after it's decided which slit it's going through, A or B, even after that, what we find is that if you look at D4, it's crazy to explain, but the electron essentially goes back in time and becomes a particle. If you look at D1, the electrons that shot from B go back in time and act like they were a particle. The only other explanation is that when they're shot, they somehow know the future, and they know that you're going to look at them. They know which ones you're going to look at. So that's totally nuts. Not that this isn't nuts, but it's easier to look at space and time is malleable, you know. That's what the delayed choice quantum eraser is. Because if you look at D2, you don't know where they came from. If you look at D3, you don't know where it came from. That's what's called the quantum eraser. But in D4, if you look at D4 or you look at D1, you know where it came from. And the moment you do that, they go back in time and actually change what happened in the past based on what you look at. Your focus, your consciousness actually changes what happened in the past. If that doesn't excite you, if that's not romantic to you, if that's not, then I'm not explaining it correctly, and I apologize, 1,000 apologies, because this is so mind-blowing, and we're not even done yet, right? But this is so crazy. So the double slit experiment teaches us that our consciousness, our actual observance determines reality. This teaches us that we actually are changing time, space and time, and our understanding of space and time is limited and is incomplete. And you can actually change space and time, and your focus alone can actually change. We're going to talk a lot about this, of what time dilation, because I've been really fascinated with that for years. But we know that time dilation exists. This is not really an example of time dilation. This is more like time traveling, but it goes back in time based on your focus now. It's really super cool. So observance or consciousness actually changes time. It isn't just the result, but that it goes back in time to change the cause, right? So whether or not you look at D4 or D1, it actually goes back in time based on which one you look at. So once the which way info, once you look at, remember, there's 4 boxes to look in. 2 of them, the which way info is lost. That's called the quantum eraser because it could come from either one. But the other 2, we know which slit they came through. Once that which way info is known, the particle will go back in time and make sure that it was acting like a particle. This has totally changed our perception of time and space. This isn't the only example of consciousness impacting reality and time. Here's some other physics and science that will give us a better picture of how it all works together. So does observance really work like that? This is the big question, right? This is just a tiny introduction. There's a whole thing called the watch pot never boils. I had a car accident. Actually, this is when I first started understanding physics and actually really seriously looked into all this stuff. It's why I always say the same thing. Like, I don't want anyone to stay here or be here or with the business stuff or anything. Like, if you don't want to do it, don't do it. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's not a big deal. Because if you want to do it, I always say the same thing with classes or attendance or anything that I take. If you don't want to do it, don't do it, right? If it's okay. That's why I appreciate you guys so much and the passion and the excitement of putting models together and developing new stuff. It's amazing. And this is why when I do something like this, I want to make sure everyone gets it. I want to just scream it from the rooftops. But everyone should understand this, right? You guys all getting this? And if you're watching this, the whole idea of this, the quantum eraser, the idea that our time is malleable, was a concept that just blew me away when I was 17 years old. Now, again, this is where I'm telling you an anecdotal story. Don't believe it. It's total BS. Like, just assume that, like, this has nothing to do. I say that we're talking about facts and physics and science and stuff. So anecdotal stories or personal stories mean nothing, right? But this is what happened to me from my perspective. I got into a car accident, 96 in Allisonville. That's why she was laughing when I said that. 96 in Allisonville. There's a CVS there. I think it's still there. There's a liquor store, and there used to be a McDonald's. Now it's a Subway. But at that intersection between the liquor store, and you can actually see this on Google Maps, between the liquor store and the Allisonville is a sidewalk, and you'll see that there's a large chunk of it that's different. That's from this accident, because I was about to T-bone this lady. And she walked out. She got the ticket. It was 100% her fault. She drove her car out and she just parked right there and stopped because she was trying to get traffic. But we were going. Our car had gone. And I remember there was a young lady I was with in my passenger seat. And I remember as soon as I saw her, she looked up and she put her hands up. Like, she was screaming because she knew I was about to hit her. And in that moment, something crazy happened. I know this sounds crazy, but imagine if this happened to you. You would act like me. Your whole life would be like around this. It wouldn't be all based on this idea, but your whole life you would be always wondering what happened that day. All of a sudden, I could see things that I could never see before, or that I never did see before. I saw what was going to happen. If I hit her, I saw that she was going to die. And so I in my mind, I kind of went backwards a few seconds, just like with the delayed choice, right? And I did the math on who I was next to and how much faster than them I was going. And I realized I could turn. It's going to be tight, but I could turn right now. And I'd have to hit the brakes, and I'd turn. And when I did that, I was going at such a speed, I knew it wasn't going to be pretty. But when I did that, it wasn't a convertible, it was a T-Tops, a Camaro T-Tops. And when I was doing that, we went and we spun, and we did like a 180 almost on two wheels, and then a 360 on two wheels. I'm on the high part, and I looked down, because as soon as we started doing that 360, as soon as we went on two wheels, something happened. I was seeing all these possibilities. Like, I could feel the tingling, like the spidey sense, right? But then when we went on two wheels, the unthinkable happened. Everything stopped and went in super slow motion. I could hear the sounds. I could hear everything. I've told the story before. I don't talk about that much because it doesn't really mean anything unless I give it context. Why am I telling this? What's the point? And again, don't believe any of that. Again, when people do like the power of, persuasion or the letter or the law of attraction and stuff, they always bring up their own like stuff and like, oh, this is like evidence. No, this is, I'm openly saying I could have been drunk or high or whatever. Believe whatever you need to believe that this didn't happen the way that I'm describing. That's okay. I'm just telling you from my perspective what happened. Everything went really slow, super slow. And I looked down and I saw this young lady. She was a year younger than me. She was about 16, 17. And I could see her head because I had T-tops. You guys know what T-tops are? It's like kind of like a convertible, but you have the back and you have the front and you have this like, this bar in between you. And as I'm looking down, because I'm driving my car and I could look down, when I look to the right, I'm like vertical. I'm looking down at the ground when I look to the right because we're almost, the passenger door is almost scraping on the pavement. And the second it was about to scrape on the pavement, she had come out of her seat enough to where her head was right there by the pavement. The car was about to smash her head. She was about to be decapitated. She was about to die. And I could see all this. I was going super slow motion. And I'm sitting there and I looked at her and I reached down her collar and I grabbed her collar. And then when I grabbed her collar and pulled her back into the car, the way she moved is the first time I thought, oh my gosh, I think I might be moving really fast. Like, it's not that everything else is moving really slow. It's that I'm moving super fast and everything else seems to be moving slow. And we spun around, we did a 360, and that's when we went and hit the sidewalk and tore that all up. And we landed. The first thing she did when she looked at me was a scene right out of the Matrix. She said, "How did you do that?" And I said, how did I do what? She's like, how did you do that? How did you move that fast? And we spent the rest of the day at this Logan's Roadhouse that just opened down the street. And we spent the rest of the day talking about this, about what happened. And I said, what did it look like for you? And to the day I die, I'm going to wonder, I'm just going to think about that, what it must have looked like to her. And she said, the best thing she described is that it was like you teleported. That's what she said. Right? It was this like crazy situation. And for her 30th birthday party, she had gotten married and she was trying to have kids. It took her a little bit of time. And she sent me this video that she had where she was giving this toast, basically. She was telling all her friends that, guess what, it's my 30th birthday party, but also, guess what, we're pregnant now. And we tried so hard. And there was this long path. But she said, I never stopped believing. I never stopped believing in miracles because when I was 17 years old, I got into a car accident and I saw something happen and she was talking about what happened that day. In her mind, she said it looked like I teleported. Like out of the corner of her eye, I was there 1 second in the driver's seat and instantly I was right there. And I've always wondered what happened that day. And so when I went back to, I was still in high school at the time, and I remember talking to my teacher about this idea, and I remember the look on people's faces when I'm like, listen, I'm not joking, it's time slowed, it's just like out of the Matrix, like time slowed down. I don't know how else to explain it. But the closest thing that I have to an explanation is what's called the quantum Zeno effect. This is a concept that we can actually recreate. When an electron jumps from a high energy to low energy, it releases a little bit of light. But this is called spontaneous emission. We've talked about this before, about like this with the Chekhov radiation and that's not this, but like when there's a high movement, there can sometimes be light that's emitted. And that's how we can track like how we can get faster than the speed of light. We'll talk about that later. But if we look at it, the whole thing with this quantum Zeno effect is that a system can be slowed just by looking at it. So when that electron goes from high energy to low energy, if you look at it, if we observe it, if we just look at it, it doesn't move. Isn't that crazy? If we look at it, it either massively slows down or the opposite can happen too, the anti-Xeno effect, where the observance can actually speed it up. But this is the concept. This is the closest thing of what happened. I don't know how to recreate it. And I don't have all the answers because I didn't really observe anything. I didn't even try it. But the idea that you can, observing a system alone can do what's called arrest any progress in that, any evolution in a process just by looking at just observance alone. 2014, the Cornell study, the rapid repetitive measurements can freeze a system in place. This is what they found out. There's two things. There's constant versus repetitive. So constant means you don't look away. And in those cases, we're having freezing. Repetitive is you look away and look back, look away and look back. So the quantum Zeno effect, Zeno was the guy, the Greek philosopher. He had a whole bunch of Zeno's paradoxes. One of them is, let's say you shoot an arrow, right? An arrow's flying through the air. At any given moment, that arrow is a moment. It's stopped, right? And since every time that you stop it is a moment, and in every moment it's not moving, that means the arrow never moves. That's his idea. Another way of looking at it is like if you take a cell phone picture out, like a slow motion cell phone, right? And someone shoots an arrow and you take a picture of it. When you take that picture, it is, for that moment, it is sitting still, right? Because it had to for you to take that picture. Well, if you could take pictures fast enough, is it possible that you could freeze that arrow in place if you had a way to take pictures fast enough? Because if every picture, the arrow is not moving. You get what I'm saying? So these are like paradoxes that he's known for making these paradoxes that seem really simple. But when you think about it, it's actually quite complicated. It's why, thousands of years later, we still remember it. And the Xeno effect is actually named after him. This idea that you can arrest any progress in a system just by looking at it, and you could slow things down and speed it up. The reason there's a Doctor Who, the Weeping Angels this was what's used in that study. They talked about this when he says, don't blink, don't even blink. Blink and you're dead. They are faster than you can believe. So turn your back, don't look away, not even for a second. These are the statues that if you look away, they come and they like take you back in time or they kill you or something. Really awful statues. But this idea of don't blink, just keep looking at it and it won't move. The whole point I'm making here is that we understand with the double slit experiment and with the delayed choice, that there is a relationship between time, our experience of time, and our focus, our consciousness. We can look at things, this idea that you can speed things up or slow them down by looking at them. One of the things that we've done, one of our experiments right now, is if constant focus freezes something, but repetitive focus can speed it up, can have the anti-Xeno effect, constantly focus on what you're grateful for, constantly focus on the great things in your life, the good things in your life, and you create more of it. You bring those things into your life faster. We've had a lot of really interesting experiments on this, and we've had a lot of pretty interesting results. But this idea, the whole point to take away from this, and what I've been really focused on for actually a long time, years at this point, is this idea of time dilation, that the way we look at time, because your life really is just time. How much time do you have left? So if these things, if you can slow down, speed up, if you can have an effect on time simply with your consciousness, simply with your thoughts, it's something I'm fascinated by. So again, I'm making it clear what the facts are and then what my experience is and what our experiments are, right? And the things we're doing. But the fact is, there's no doubt focus alone can freeze things in place. The quantum Xeno Effect shows us this. We can do this, and it's this ain't no thing, right? This is something we can have happen. Now let's talk about time dilation in general. So the whole idea, the entire theory of relativity that Einstein had, he basically said gravity affects time, right? But we also know that light can create gravity, and we know that light is created basically just photons. So if gravity affects time and light can create gravity, and light is from photons and photons are influenced with our consciousness, that that's why I'm saying, I'm laying out what if you were to summarize the theory of relativity, Einstein's theory of relativity in one sentence, it is that gravity affects time and also that light can create gravity. Basically, that's essentially it. But if we know that photons, all light is just photons, and we've talked about this whole time, we've talked about the effect that our consciousness, our observation, our focus has on photons. Does your focus, in fact, can your focus affect light, which creates gravity, and ultimately affect time? Can you, with your thoughts alone, create a difference of time? This, I know I don't have this fully cooked yet. I know this whole idea of I don't have this fully cooked yet, but there's something here. So in 1971, the first commercial flight with an atomic clock went out, and this is what time dilation is, Einstein's theory when we talk about it, and this was actually confirmed. So the airplane went, and an airplane only goes like 500-600 miles an hour or whatever. The speed of light it goes around the Earth 7 times in 1 second. It's like 671 million miles an hour, right? So it's insanely, ridiculously fast. But the idea they wanted to see is, does time dilation work on a small scale? And the fact is, yes. If you get on a flight, you gain or lose, depending on where you are, about 40 billionths of a second. So if you were on an airplane for a full 100 years, you end up gaining a second or 2 seconds or 30 seconds, something like that. It's it wouldn't be worth it, obviously. But time dilation does happen, meaning that if you're traveling at a certain speed, you experience time in a different way. And again, the reason this is important is because when we talk about photons or consciousness, how does that play into it? So the muons, the whole idea of the muons, this new breakthrough that's happening, is the muons wobble. You could talk to Miss Lynn more about that. She knows more about that than I'm still learning about this whole idea. The new discovery they made, these muons, when cosmic rays hit our atmosphere, they break up. And the muons, like the neutrinos, are really tiny. The neutrinos are so small, they don't run into anything. They can travel for millions of years and not hit anything, not run into anything. So we barely know they're there, except for the rare case that they hit something, like in the ice cube experiment. The reason we go into ice is because light travels a little bit slower underwater. And when the muon can go not faster than light, but since it goes almost the speed of light, like a neutrino, when it hits something, it creates that blue wave. That's the whole thing with the ice cube stuff. That's not that important right now. The muons have a half-life, though. Think about this. If the muon has a half-life, it only survives for 0.23 milliseconds. How does it go? It should only be able to go 1 kilometer or something. How does it go 30, 40, 50, 60 miles in that short period of time? Because if you were on that tiny little muon, you're experiencing time differently because it's going at almost the speed of light. You get what I'm saying? So we recognize this with satellites. Satellites go 6,000 miles an hour. And when they send the time to your phone or anything, there's a time delay, because if you were on that satellite, you're experiencing time differently than you are if you're not, the faster you're going. There's a great experiment on this. Michael Cifre, he had a whole nother type of time dilation through perspective. This is really my marriage of these two things. He went to a cave, or first he went to an island. He said, I'm going to stay on this island for 90 days. I've talked about this study a lot because it is I'm really fascinated at how we experience time and how this relates to some of these new discoveries we're having right now. But he went to this island, right? And he said, I'm going to spend 90 days on this island and see what happens. It was a study on isolation. And he started documenting in his journal, day 1, day 2, day 3. And on day 45, they came and got him. And he's like, what are you guys doing? It's only been 45 days. And they said, no, it's been 90 days. It's been 90 days. What was happening is he would go to sleep and wake up or go to sleep for twice as long, and he wouldn't realize it because nobody was there. There's nothing to do on an island. And he was totally blown away by this. So he thought, you know what, let me get more people and see if this would happen. But on an island, different people sleep at different times, and someone else could tell you, oh, you know what, you only slept so much time, right? So it could ruin that whole thing. That ruined the experience. They went into a cave underground where there's no clocks, no sun, anything, and let's see what happens. And what the factor, his time had collapsed by a factor of 2 to 1. In other words, he was living 2 days, but he was only experiencing 1 day. His time was disappearing, was collapsing. The same thing happened when they went in the cave with the group of people, is that over time, it was about 5 to 6 weeks, what happens is they started to realize the exact same thing. They were they were living 2 days, but they thought they were only living 1. So they're living Monday, they're only realizing Monday, but they actually have Monday and Tuesday, right? And what happens is that over time, that collapse gets even more. You start living, you're like surviving 3 days, but you're only experiencing 1. Then you're surviving 4 days and you're experiencing 1. You're surviving 5 days, you're experiencing 1. This happens all the time. We always hear people say, where did the week go? Where did the month go? This year's going by so fast. No, it's not going by so fast. What's happening, and this is the kind of the key, time collapses when there's no novelty, when there's not any progress, when you're just in a cave or when you're on an island. The less you do with your time, the more your perspective of it changes. So the more that one day blends into the next day or the one before it or the one after it or whatever, the less any of those days stand out, the more they just blend together. If I asked you, what'd you do last week? If there's not much that you have to say, that whole week, you lived a week, but you only experienced what? An hour, 2 hours? This time dilation keeps happening. It keeps happening again and again. The time keeps collapsing, where we all know what this is like, right? Where you spend, a month, but you really didn't do anything. You sit down to read a book and you spend like 20, 30 minutes and you're like, I didn't read anything, or I only got like such a tiny amount of very tiny amount that I actually read. And I don't even remember what I read. Or you read for 5, 10 pages. You don't even remember what you read. You read 5 pages, but you only took away 1 sentence, right? The same thing happens with time in life. And I know this is different than the time dilation that Einstein's talking about, but I think they're related because, again, if gravity effect, this is my opinion. This is what we're experimenting right now on how we can unfold time. I gotta say, man, this is a bonkers class that nobody's gonna, you're recording it, I appreciate it, but I mean, this is like my own, rantings on this subject. I usually have like more defined stuff to say. Like with you guys, when I throw this out to you guys, it's always like an experiment. Let's just test it and see what happens. This is how I come up with it, because think about this. If you were in the car with me in the back seat the day that I went down and I saved that girl's life, only for her to go and get knocked up by some rando guy. No. But if you were there, I would have looked like what? I would have looked like Neo from the Matrix, right? Like you would have been like, oh my gosh, right? That would have been like totally crazy. Unless you had sped up your time experience as well, right? You would have been like, wow, how are you doing that? How are you moving so fast? How are you doing this stuff? But here's the thing. And I know that I don't have this totally fully cooked yet, okay? Like I said. But is that not the way that people react when they come around us now? Isn't that what's happening, right? That's exactly what I said. Write down that, guys. So our lender on this house right now, if you don't know, these houses that we're buying, we're paying off at accelerated amounts. Basically, we put a model in place, and then the amount of money, we're putting like 50% more than the value of the house into the houses to get them fitted the way that we need them for like our sensory deprivation or our arcade rooms, basically. But the idea here is that because we are understanding, I've been obsessed with this idea of time for a while, and that's why you got to set records and have every day have some record-breaking thing, something special you've done that makes that day stand out from the one before it, the one after it. Because if you don't have these days stand out, they blend together, they disappear, and they vanish forever. Your time is gone. You live 2 days, but you only experienced 1, and that just keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger. You live a month, but you only experienced a day, and it's even worse than that. I think it could be just an hour, right? And when people come around us, we are essentially doing this. I have this theory. Again, I think we're doing this. I think we are, because when people the first question people have is like, how are you guys doing this? And I remember our banker's wife said, whatever they're doing there in those houses is not legal. I get it. I understand how it looks like that. And like the models we put together, the fact that we can have, I used to think 30 grand a month was a lot of money. I used to think 100 grand a month was a lot of money. Now, it ain't no thing, man. You do any study on anyone on our team, our heroes, man, this ain't no thing, man. Anyone can do it. It's easy. Get your head out of your ass. Don't be an LC about it. Get serious. Get hungry. and take my stuff seriously, and you'll change lives, starting with your own and then other people's lives as well. It's really easy to do. But what's happening really is that, like, if you go to the SA class, you are collapsing centuries worth of progress, and you're doing it basically overnight. And how is that not time? How are you not collapsing, having an impact on time, right? Like, everything is energy, and your lived time can actually change the progress you're making and the way that you actually experience, the way you look at time, the way you look at what is possible. If you believe that 1 year takes that, and like, ask yourself, what can you accomplish in 1 year or 1 month or 1 week or whatever, right? What if you believe that you could accomplish that in 1 day? Doesn't your experience of time actually, I know this seems like it's not, I'm not fully, I don't have this totally in, but like, if you look from the muons' point of view, the muons, they're going almost at the speed of light when they hit our Earth, but to them, the Earth is coming towards them, right? It's a totally different perspective, and that's why they can survive, even though it's only a few milliseconds. If you were on that muon, or if you were that muon, you're experiencing time totally differently. So if somebody's watching you, it'd be like the Matrix, which is what happens when people come around us right now. They're like, you guys are on another planet, right? You can time travel, you can unlock time by living more in these moments, by having record wins, by doing the things we talk about setting wins and having significant wins during the day, and then breaking up the day into 100 different pieces and having these bigger wins. This is also what we do with a model. Like, when we say a model should be able to produce 20 grand, by the end of the week, or, 30 grand a month within, month one. And we go out and we do what is considered by anybody outside of our group impossible. They would say we're moving at light speed. A connected person, someone who's connected to where they should be, connected to the deep current, as we talk about, who's where you want to be with the universe and all that stuff, you would appear like almost like a time traveler. You are doing exponentially more with the same limited time that we all have. You get what I'm saying? I don't have this fully cooked yet, but there's all these concepts, all these ideas, and I think they've all come together in some way. It's like this perfect intersection, and this is ultimately what we're doing. What do we do here? When you come around us, you will be repelled if you're not hungry, and if you're not connected, if you're not connecting yourself, that you're just like, oh gosh, these guys are crazy. Right, but if you're on the inside, what we're doing just seems like we're just making it happen. But to people watching us, it's like we are like in the Matrix, like the things we do. How do we grow businesses so quick? How do we do these things? There's some form of time dilation. Like I said, I don't really know what I'm talking about. But so that's the quantum Xeno effect. That's a double slit experiment. The quantum delayed choice. Now let's talk about this really cool part. How would a fish know what water is? There's a famous story about two fish swimming along. A third fish comes up and says, "Hey, good morning. Isn't the water great today?" And then he swims off. The two fish keep swimming. Then one of them turns the other and says, "Hey, what's water?" How would a fish know what water is? So there's this whole idea of dark matter that's been around us all the time. We know that whatever it is, whatever dark matter, whatever this stuff is, there's a lot more of it than there is of us. I've said many times, imagine you're in the ocean and you see fish swimming and ships and all this stuff. But imagine if you had no way of sensing what the water was. The only way we could see things now is the way they interact with light, right? What if there was nothing there? There was no water. You couldn't touch it. You couldn't smell it. You didn't have any way to tell what water was. You didn't know what water was. How would you know it's there? You would still know something is there because you see something between you and the fish. You see something between the boats floating. You see stuff floating. You just don't know what it's called, right? That's basically the way the entire universe is. And it's been like that for almost forever, where there's all this stuff. We don't know what to call it, so we call it dark matter. But there's a lot more of it than there is of everything else. But it doesn't interact with light, so we have no way of seeing it. How do we know it's there? Because of the way it interacts with gravity, just like water, right? We know that something's there because something's floating. So this whole idea of the dark matter, this idea was brought up in the 50s, I think, 50s, 60s. The Higgs boson, the Higgs field, the Higgs boson particle. The whole idea of the muons, by the way, she was talking about earlier. I said, ask Miss Lynn about this. But what happened with the muons and with the wobble, we thought we had it established with the foam. She'll talk more about that later. But what that means is that it's not like, imagine we're going through the alphabet and we find another letter. That would be crazy, right? Like, another letter, where is it? This isn't that. This is like we found a whole new alphabet. So every book that's ever been written would be misspelled, right? That's how significant this breakthrough is with the muons and with the Like when you spin a top, it wobbles because of the effect of gravity. It's the same thing that happens with the muons, but we thought we understood what it was. And in 2001, there was one study that said that it was a little bit different, and now we're confirming that in fact it was. We have to be at 5 sigma to be certain. We're like 4.1 or something like that right now. So we'll talk more about that later. She knows a lot more about that than I do. She actually wrote a book on it, so you should want to talk to her. But I'm still fascinated by this whole idea that we learn more and more. And the more we learn, the more we realize things like this are confirmed. So this whole idea of dark matter, right? The Higgs field, we don't know, we just don't know what it is. Like a fish that doesn't know that knows there's something there, but it doesn't know what water is. There's much more of this stuff than there isn't. It's everywhere. In the 50s, they came up with the Higgs boson field. It was theorized officially, but in 2012, what they call the God particle, you may have heard of this, and some of you have heard of this, was confirmed, and now we know. This is to us what water is to the ocean, to the fish. We are all in this current right now. There's a current between you and your screen. There's between you and everything else. It's this field that's out there. It's like we are underwater essentially, and the water is this field. It's the Higgs field. We know it's there now. It's confirmed. You can look more into this. The idea though is that just like in water, everything in water is sending out a wave, right? We are sending out these waves constantly into this field, and we're sending them out based on our vibration. I'm going to show you how we've tracked this in a second. The main thing to take away from this is that there is this field. We're in water. It's constant. It's everywhere. It is absolutely proven. We've seen this again and again. You can read more about the God particle, and they call it the God particle because it's like something that's everywhere. This is one of the most important discoveries, the most important things there is, because nothing would exist. Nothing would have mass. The universe only exists with mass, and nothing would have charge or mass or anything. There would be nothing if it wasn't for this field. Again, what would the ocean be without the water? It wouldn't be an ocean. We are in an ocean, but an ocean, it's a field. We know very little about it, but we know it's there, and we've been able to test it and see it now. And in this field, you and I are constantly sending out stuff and receiving stuff through this field. It's like we're all like these like wireless connections. Does that make sense? Okay, so Einstein and the wave-particle duality. It seems as though we must use sometimes one theory and sometimes the other. While at times we may use either. I was explaining this when we talked about the explanations earlier, right? We are faced with a new kind of difficulty. We have two contradictory pictures of reality. Separately, neither of them fully explains the phenomena of light, but together they do, right? It's like we talked about. It's crazy. Energy is everything. Everything is energy, and that's all there is to it. Match the frequency of the reality you want. This second quote, there's question about this, whether he said it or someone else said it, but everything is energy, and that's all there is to it. Match the frequency of the reality you want, and you cannot help but get that reality. It can be no other way. This is not philosophy. This is science. This idea, he understood the Higgs field in some concept, but this idea that there is a frequency, there's a vibration that we're sending out constantly through this field. Everything in life is vibration. Okay, Tesla on frequency. I talk a lot about Tesla, but that is kind of the difference between me and us, Anna and I, and everyone else. You know, I don't care about being right. I just want to win. So when somebody suggests something different to me, I'm like, yeah, let's try it. Let's do it. That's why this whole process, the reason why there's like so much here and why this is such a involved class, honestly, is because I sit down with the smartest, best people I can find. And I always say, here's what we're doing right now. Let's take a hammer to it. Let's put it on the on the board, on the cutting room floor, and let's just attack it and bring it down. This is why we have such a big problem with special needs in general and dealing with things, is that we accept things for the way they are instead of looking at what we can do. How can we unlock potential? What if we're looking at everything totally wrong? What if there's a whole alphabet out there that we don't realize, right? This is why these are the kinds of fields that you want to study, because they start with we don't know anything, and then let's move forward and let's look at what we can prove and what we can determine, and let's do a series of experiments and just see what happens and see what kind of results we have. I say all that because it is true. For those of you that didn't hear, as we were saying earlier, that the things that you guys that we're able to do right now with our heroes, nobody in the world is even close to doing. How is it possible that, people have been in this field? Many of you have been doing this longer than I have in the special needs world. It's crazy. We were talking about this earlier. Like right now, we've been in coronavirus for about half the time that I've been and working with special needs. Think about that for a second. Isn't that crazy? But that's only what we're saying right now. In 5 years, I'm not going to say that, right? Because I'm going to say, I basically started at the same time as COVID, right? But what are the chances that we would start doing this and have this group of people who are now diehard business builders and ready to go out and start getting equity plays at the same time where that one skill becomes the single most profitable thing? You know what I mean? What an amazing thing. how many miracles there are in my life that I've realized. And again, it's anecdotal, but I'm saying that you can look at everything as a miracle or is not a miracle. It's your choice. But the fact that you look at it as a miracle, we are seeing more and more that in itself creates it, turns it into a miracle. So Tesla was one of the greatest minds on earth. Hero of Egypt is also up there. But there's some quotes he's had that are pretty crazy. One of the first ones is, if you wish to understand the universe, think of energy, frequency, and vibration. Everything is in constant vibration. Everything is always moving. And we're going to talk about what frequency means in a second. This is one of the there's two quotes from Tesla that have always blown me away. My brain is only a receiver. In the universe, there is a core from which we obtain knowledge, strength, and inspiration. I have not penetrated into the secrets of this core, but I know that it exists. One area in the universe that is a source of all brilliance. And he believed that you could go somewhere in your mind into a certain frequency and you could tap into it. He said, my brain is only a receiver. The two most important quotes that I've taken away from all Tesla's readings and his stuff, we've only unlocked about 10% of what he did. There's things that he's thinking of that are centuries ahead of where we're at right now. But my brain is only a receiver. We know what that's like, right? It's like Michael Jackson, the greatest dancer ever, talked about when he would get on stage and dance. He felt he was like a conduit. He was channeling something from somewhere else, right? We all know what that's like when you're in the zone, so to speak, and when you're at the highest and best version of yourself. You feel this where you are getting something from somewhere else, somewhere unknown, the universe. So my brain is only a receiver. I love that. Alpha waves in the human brain are between 6 and 8 hertz. The wave frequency of the human cavity resonates between 6 and 8 hertz. This is a quote from Tesla. All biological systems operate in the same frequency range. The human brain's alpha waves function in this range. The electrical resonance of the earth is between 6 and 8 hertz. Thus, our entire biological system, the brain and the earth itself, work on the same frequencies. If we can control that resonant system electronically, we can directly control the entire mental system of humankind. You're going to understand that a lot more as we move forward. But this is also the work I started doing, the EEG machine, the EKG, meaning the electrocardiogram. The same thing happens with we can do with your brain, which we'll get to in a second. Hero of Alexandria. Only converse with those who raise your thoughts. Only do things that raise your output, as your brain is always acting as both sender and receiver. So no matter what the cost, vibrate at the highest frequency possible. What does all that mean? Throughout history, great minds have studied this, and they all agree on three main things. Number one, we are all basically in water. We're all islands, all connected, floating on a common current. The Higgs field actually confirms this more than anything else. Number two, your thoughts and brain activity give your body being a kind of ripple that goes through this. It's like a frequency vibration, and it's sent out through this water to other things. And then number three, based on that ripple that you broadcast, you will create, and or magnetically attract things that are aligned with your wave ripple. Like attracts like, right? But again, people have thought about this, but what science do we have, or where do we see this frequency or vibration coming into play? So what does the science say? The more we learn about this, the more those ideas are confirmed. Nothing is standing still. Everything is in vibration, sending and receiving signals through the water, through the Higgs field, like tuning forks that pick up vibration and attract. So you guys have seen the tuning forks there. You hit one tuning fork. I should have brought them up here. I don't know if it would come up on this mic though. You have one tuning fork that you're not touching. You have one of them that you hit and it vibrates. Then you grab it, you stop it from vibrating, and the vibration still continues. What's happening? The other fork is now picked up that frequency, picked up that vibration. It's the same thing when people crack glasses. With a singer can crack the glass. She matches that frequency, and you have what's called resonance, where you give it like a boost, like you give a kid a boost on the swing. And when you give that boost, a big boost, and it bends too much, it actually breaks the glass. But it's all about frequency and matching that frequency. The RAS is your brain's bouncer. I've talked a lot about this, the reticular activating system. Basically, let's say you go out and you buy a red car, and then all of a sudden you see red cars, just like your car, right? Make and model. Were those cars there before? This is the only question that we have, whether or not, like, let's say you think of a blue dog, and you've never seen a blue dog, right? But what if all of a sudden you see one, or you see a cartoon of a blue dog or something? Did you just pick that up because it was put in your head and it was the bouncer of your brain that tells you what to filter out and what's important? Or did you actually create that? Was that blue dog never there until you thought about it? This is a question, but for no matter what the situation is, to the observer, to the person, perception is reality. So what you train your RAS to think is important, your brain will actually go out and find in the world. We've seen this, 1,000 times, 1,000,000 times. We've seen this again and again in studies. But the RAS, if you look this up, the reticular activating system, it's the part of your brain that tells all the trillions of things that are happening in your world right now. You filter out almost everything. But what should you focus on? What's important? Ever be in like a crowded airport, you hear someone say your name and you can hear that, or your kids' names, or the kids call your name? You hear it instantly. Why? Because your RAS has been trained that that's important. Whatever you think about, good or bad, positive, negative, especially if you watch the news, shame on you. If you do that stuff, you're telling your brain this is important. It's just like the way the internet reshapes itself based on what you click on. Your internet, if I sit down at your computer, and my internet are totally different. You ever sit down at like your kid's computer and you're like, oh my gosh, what are they looking to? What are they looking into, right? Like crazy stuff. It's because they train the computer. They train the internet. This is important to me. This is what I engage with. This is what I watch. This is what I want. And the internet will go out and find more of that. It'll change the ads you see. It'll change the ads you don't see. It'll change the videos that you see, the suggested videos. It'll change the emails, what it says on the ads that you see on your emails. It changes your entire experience of the internet. Every website, the websites that show up in your search history, the autofill suggestions that show up, the autofill suggestions on names that you type in. Everything you see changes. When you go to maps, so you look at images, the entire internet reshapes itself, just like your brain. It's like neuroplasticity, but the entire internet reshapes itself based on what you do. The world, the RAS does the exact same thing and filters out what you experience from the world. So whether or not it's real, like whether or not you actually create that blue dog, or whether or not you pick it up out of the environment, to you, it doesn't matter. It is essentially created and or focused on based on what you've trained your brain. So the question is, what have you trained? What have you told your brain is important? And by default, it's what you think about the most. Every thought has a frequency. We're going to talk about this in a second. We can measure this now. When I went and took my son, the first time I really went all in on this stuff, on frequency, and I said, man, I got to get to the bottom of the science. And I'm in touch with neurologists and neuroscientists and neurosurgeons every day, and my family as well. For the first, it's so ironic. My family wanted me to be a brain surgeon. Of course, I went totally different route. But now, not that I'm a brain surgeon now, but I'm working with neurosurgeons every day based on this stuff, because when I worked with my son and we got his thoughts on track, I don't want to get into what meltdowns were. I don't like to talk about that stuff too much. And then every time I do, I always say I don't like to talk about it. But I mean, it's like, for those of you that have experienced it, it's like, it's to somebody else watching it, if you haven't seen a meltdown, it's like they are going to kill themselves. This is no exaggeration. And if you get in their way, they're going to kill you. And if there's animals, I mean, they might just, you don't know what's going to happen. It's like dark, dark stuff. And when we started to get through that and we fixed that issue, what happened was, and that's a whole other thing, by the way. How did I have a memory of something that didn't happen? Like there's things like quantum tunneling and things like that. I've kind of have different thoughts on that. But the point that what I can provably say is when we went to the doctor's office, and you could see his brain scans. His brain is actually different after doing this stuff. And that's when I realized, my gosh, we can do this with anything. And that's when I said, you know what? I know how to make the money part. That's easy. Getting rich that ain't no thing. If we can get people, anyone, the special needs or not, but at least they're hungry, to start going through these habits, start changing your thoughts, remodeling your brain will actually be different. It'll be working on a much higher level. You'll have a totally different frequency of thought. As Tesla said, a frequency of thought. It's the most important thing you have. You ever get around to someone that's kind of dumb, after a couple weeks they're not so dumb, they didn't get smarter, you got dumber. Frequency will always match frequency of your company, and frequency always seeks out similar frequency. It's just like the tuning fork. And this is why you're basically like a radio station. You're constantly tuning into what you think is important. And when you control your thoughts, not only does it become easier to think those thoughts, but those thoughts attract other thoughts, and then the field that you have grows and grows. We'll talk about that more in a second. The more focused you think about something, the easier it is, and the more other similar frequency thoughts will join it. First internally, and then externally. Other thoughts in other heads, other thoughts of other people. When you get around someone, you ever get around someone, we were just talking about this earlier where this guy, we had this conversation, and he said, I won't say the exact words, but he was basically like, if I blah, 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 that nobody knows what they're doing. And if they don't want to take me seriously, then F them. And he was getting really pretty nasty. And she got nervous because she hadn't had many, she's the first nasty conversation she'd ever had with this guy that's a realtor, and he doesn't know, it doesn't matter. The point being, when she said, she got off the phone thinking, wow, I feel like really down. Right? That's by design, right? So there's a great picture we have. If you were to walk into our old house, our old headquarters, what happened, there was a picture of this mother holding a child's hand. The child says, why are some people amazing, beautiful, and brilliant? Other people are nasty, awful, and terrible. And the mother says, she's looking down at her, says, because we all want people to feel how we feel, right? You ever talk to someone, you're around them for just a few seconds, a few minutes, and you instantly feel worse about life, right? They watch the news, most likely. But that is the effect that they have. frequency is contagious. You get around someone, and the in Vegas they used to have coolers. We were talking about this. A lot of these mobster casino bosses, they used to believe in coolers. So if somebody was hot and hitting a winning streak at the casino, they would send this person over who didn't need to talk to you, didn't need to touch you. Just being around them would bring you down, right? And there's a movie about one that William H. Macy, and he falls in love with this girl, and whose uncle, by the way, in real life was one of our investors years ago. But and Alec Baldwin is a casino owner, and after he falls in love, all of a sudden he goes around to be the cooler, and he's not a cooler anymore because he's like, these people around me, they're not losing anymore. They're winning because he's giving off a totally different frequency. Your thoughts send a quake. They send like a ripple that tremors to every cell in your body, the trillions of cells in your body, and the trillions of like neutrinos that are in your body right now too, everything. Your body is always listening. This is one of the top things I take away from everything we're talking about. The cells in your body, the trillions of cells in your body, they're always listening to what you're thinking. They believe your words, they believe your thoughts, and the frequency of thoughts you have ripples through your body and affects every cell in your being. We can show this, we can prove it with science. I'm going to go over that in a second. With technology today, we can see this frequency in action. So what is your frequency and how can you change it? A lot of studies have gone into this. The measuring brain activity and how it affects a human used to be mocked like in the 30s and 50s, 40s. Now it's much more used. In medicine, healthcare, there's a common pattern of things that go through. First, people mock it, they deny it, and eventually accepting the science as norm. So a lot of the things I'm talking about, I get how like time dilation and saying that stuff, or some of the other things about slowing down time, and I get how that sounds, but eventually things become norm. I'm not saying that I'm Einstein, but I'm Einstein. So today we see that neurologists, neurosurgeons, psychologists, and many others are using brain scans or EEG. So there's an EKG that we could use on your heart, puts a little stethoscope, little sticker sensor on your heart, and we could track your heartbeat. And it's actually just energy. That's all anything is. It's a vibration, right? It's a beat. And we can track the same thing with your brain. We could put our shower cap on, or we can put on individual sensors, and we could track your brain. And now for the first time, we're going under the hood, so to speak, to track problems and diagnose problems decades earlier than usual. And then we could treat them a lot faster. But this process of the EEG is a really important part of that, because neurosurgeons now and neurologists are using this around the world. I've been super involved in this lately. And a lot of our work is based on this stuff, what we can trackably see how your brain change over time. Today, tech has brought the cost way down, and the processes like neurofeedback and others allow you to see your frequency and brain activity for yourself in real time. The advancements that have made just since I've been doing this are pretty crazy. I could hook you up to a machine right now. Some of you, we've done this with the neurofeedback machine, for example, and we could see your brain waves, and based on what you think about, based on ideas, we're going to talk about how to trigger gamma rays, which is where you want to be, but based on what you think about, it changes, raises or lowers your frequency. I'll try to take into account all criticism of our approach while focusing on objective facts and results. I say this because I know people don't think that business stuff is the best thing for like young people or whatever to do, but I don't have a better measure than if you come to me, I have to do what's fun for me too, right? Because otherwise, it's not fun. Why would I do it, right? This is really super exciting to me, but we use all this stuff to make money basically, and people really hate that, especially now. Like even using the word billionaire is like outlawed. You know what I mean? Like I want to have the first special needs billionaire, to start a business. And it's just like you say that kind of stuff. There are people now, it's a weird time we're in where there are people, I never heard anyone identify themselves as like a communist or a socialist. I know like 50 now, like especially in the, the field like teachers and stuff like that. It's pretty interesting. Like I'm just saying, like I've never heard anyone say that. But so I'm going to take that into account. This isn't just about money. This is about improving your life, improving your functionality, being able to take the effects of whatever special needs or a special handicap. Within special needs world, we have mental illness, we have handicaps, we have physical handicaps, mental handicaps, addiction, all that stuff. That's all in the same, ultimately, if we can fix your brain, everything else is improved. You don't have to make money. Just, you can fix your brain, without doing the money stuff. Okay, so brainwave or EEG research is now used to help with everything. We're now going through diagnosis, and we're working on studying brain activity helps in diagnosis and treatment of everything from epilepsy, depression, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, anxiety, cognitive delays, learning disabilities, autism, PTSD, headaches, migraines, ADHD, physical brain damage recovery, sleep disorders. Sleep centers I've been working with for a while, and this is when I first started, they're like, why are you all of a sudden interested in that stuff? Because I've been doing that stuff for years, but now like really seriously looking into it, because I've been really, for you to change your heart rate, for example, it takes a breathing. You can go through breathing practice. You could change your heart rate and get a healthier heart rate, but usually you're gonna have to get through diet and exercise. It's gonna take time. And the same thing with sleeping. It's gonna, we can track your sleeping, but you've got to. It's an in-depth process. You got to go through time. But if you don't sleep correctly, sleep apnea, sleep disorders, a range of sleep studies and sleep centers that we have. We've been in this for a while because if you're not sleeping well, everything in your life is affected. But even that stuff starts with your brain activity, and I never really paid that much attention to it until recently. Seizures, strokes, paralysis, addiction, schizophrenia, psychosis, OCD, bipolar disorder, and much more. That's not even all the stuff that we're working on right now with this same process, with this same measuring of brain waves and brain function. So neurofeedback, neuropsychology, neurology, what are the basics of waves, and what do you need to understand about this to understand what a frequency is? So here's a standard wave, right? It goes up and down, just like your heart rate, just like anything else. Here are the parts that are important. First, we have a peak. Every wave has a peak, and then we have a bottom, right? That's going to be, we have the baseline in the middle right here, and the distance that we go from the baseline to the top is the peak. The distance we go down, we should be about that amount. It should be, some form of symmetry. Here is the bottom, and the distance between the baseline and the peak, or the baseline and the bottom, that's called the amplitude. That's how tall that wave is. Amplitude doesn't affect voltage necessarily, but this is what we want to study when we look at like the heart rate or the brain waves. This is what we're looking at. It's important that you understand this, just so you understand what we're looking at when we look at a wave. We have the amplitude, the height of the wave, we have the peak and the bottom. Now, the wavelength is from when we go from one place on the wave to the next place. That is called the wavelength, right? Does that make sense? So this is when we study, when we're looking at the sheet, if you guys have seen, when we do the EEG study, this is what we're looking at. We're looking at the wavelength. So if we take this is all you need to know basically, because we're just going to change these things. Because the amount of time, so the way that we study frequency is how often you go through this in 1 second. So if we have 1 hertz, which is what your heartbeat is roughly at 60 beats a second, 60 beats a minute, that means 1 beat a second. So it'd be 1 hertz, 1 cycle a second. The question is, how many wavelengths do you go through in 1 second? Or how many wavelengths pass in 1 second? So if we're representing 1 second, which would be your heart rate, this would be 1 hertz, right? If you have 2 hertz, that means we're going through 2, 1, 2, right? So this would represent half a second. If we're going through 3, 5, you get what I'm saying? We measure the vibration. That's how many frequencies or how many wavelengths we're going through. It's called the frequency. That frequency is a vibration, and that's measured in hertz. And the hertz is how many of these we're going through, how many oscillations or patterns or cycles are happening in 1 second. Does that make sense? So 5 hertz is what? That means you're going through 5 wavelengths in 1 second. Does that make sense? Right? Everyone's sort of clear on that? Yeah. So that's, you guys are kind of seeing the studies when we're, if you've gone through the EEG machine with us, this is what we're looking at, right? So the higher the frequency, amplitude isn't necessarily the frequency, but the higher the frequency, just know this, the more of these waves you're going to see in 1 second, right? So the slower it is, the longer, the bigger, the slower. It's like 1 second, right? 1,000, 1 Mississippi, and you go through 1 cycle, right? The lower is where you're going to be. We're going to go through the different brain waves in a second. But basically, you're getting a sense when we talk about delta, theta, alpha, beta, and gamma. Those are all different rays, but they're based on the same pattern. Make sense? So how many times you go through a wavelength in 1 second? That's the hertz. Make sense? Okay, so there's 5 main brain waves. You have delta, theta, alpha, beta, and gamma. So the delta is around 1 to 5 hertz. What does that mean? That means you're going to have 1 to 5 of these wavelengths happen in 1 second. Does that make sense? So we can tell just by looking at 2 different wavelengths what the hertz is, right? Or at least which one has a higher frequency or a lower frequency. Does that make sense? So which one of these 2 has a higher frequency or lower frequency? The one at the top has a lower frequency, right? The one at the bottom has a higher frequency. We have, assuming this is the same timeline, in 1 second, we're having more patterns go through. Does that make sense? So delta is at 1 to 5 hertz. Theta is at 5 to 10 hertz. Alpha is at 10 to 20 hertz. So what does that mean, the 10 to 20 hertz? The 10 hertz, that means we're going through 10 wavelengths in 1 second. Makes sense? Alpha is at 10 to 20 hertz. Beta is at 20 to 30 hertz. And then gamma is at 38 to 50 hertz roughly. These are rough, they could change a little bit, but these are the kind of the contours of the hertz and the frequency. This is what we're talking about when we talk about frequency specifically. Are we good? We need to take a break or something? I keep saying we need to take a break. You guys are soldiers. Oh, no, darling, I never need a break. I'm good. I'm talking about you guys. No, it's good. We should take a break, though. Good? No? We're good? Okay. All right. So this is what we study when we look at when a neurologist, when we sit down and we talk to him about. I was actually the assistant. I'm Anna's assistant because I don't have any degrees or any formal education. So when I work with these people, I'm just like an assistant or a consultant. So I'm just super fascinated by this stuff because when I started to track what in the cases, not just with my own son, but when I started with some of your other kids, that's the first thing we want to look at is where's the frequency of the thought right now? Because we can look at the brain and we can have a 3D map of the brain and we can tell where the problems are. We can look and say, okay, that's where the problem is. How it's not, people say you use only 10% of your brain. Well, what percentage of a keyboard you use at any given time, right? It's not how much you're using, it's how well it's working in concert together. So gamma, all of these are important, right? So delta and theta is basically sleeping state. Theta is like when you wake up. Alpha should be where you're at right now, at least, where you're paying attention. Beta is when you're paying super close attention, right? So alpha is like you're paying attention a little bit. Beta is like you're taking a test to pass the board or something, really super high focus. Gamma is the absolute highest frequency. Gamma is when we talk about being in the zone, talking about being connected to the universe, being at the highest and best version of yourself. And what we've seen is that we can associate different emotions, different psychological states, different levels of cognition, different levels of intelligence, different levels of IQ, different levels of recollection based on these frequencies. The higher, obviously you want to have some repair time too. That's why sleep studies are important as well. But our goal is to get to gamma. Basically it's game over. The higher we can get to gamma, we all know what gamma's like. Gamma's like when you're connected to the universe. Gamma's like why you never need a break, right? Gamma is why, it's when you see nothing but possibility and opportunity. That's what gamma ultimately is, right? So what we see here is that each state, we can actually apply different emotions, different feelings to a actual hertz and a frequency. So when we talk about frequency, we're talking about something mathematical that we can track. It's not just, be more positive or stuff. It's actually, there's certain thoughts that trigger the gamma. We can do this at length. We can actually set this. We were talking about this earlier with Miss Lynn. We had her hooked up and we went over some of the exercises we're going to go over later, and instantly your gamma gets picked up. And we know what it's like when you get around other people as well. You get around them and you just feel better. You feel like more capable. You feel better about the world. So here's a chart here. We talk about our frequency chart here. Basically, we have down in the low states, not that delta and theta is always negative, but you get what I'm saying. Down in low frequencies, we have negative. Then we have more neutral. Alpha, beta is like more neutral, getting more towards a positive. And then you have positive, the gamma, which ultimately our goal is to be at the gamma. So when we take this out here, here's an example of these different thoughts, different attitudes, different feelings that are triggered. This is why we say what you think about is the most important thing, because what you think about controls what you're focusing on, and that controls what you feel. It's like Emerson said, everything we do is in the field, or is in the shadow of how we feel at the moment. If you control what you think, you control how you feel. If you control how you feel, you control what you do. And nothing is going to determine how far you go in life more than what you do, obviously, right? So at the bottom here, we have resentment, blame, limited. Everything's limited. We have anger, fear, right? These are the nastiest things we have. We always see these at the low frequency. We always see these at the lowest frequency of thinking. You can feel yourself when somebody's got a low frequency. All frequency is contagious, right? You get around people, you instantly feel like this. You watch the news, you instantly feel like this. This is why our news is where they are. Before, the way that our brain evolutionary has developed, if you didn't pay attention to bad news, you could get taken out of the gene pool real quick. But now, since we don't have that fear of, getting eaten by a tiger, for most of us at least, we have the same thing. Our brain is still wired the same way, like a caveman brain, but in this new age of Twitter and Facebook and news and stuff. So whenever we hear bad news, it becomes more attractive. It becomes something we need to pay attention to, even if it's manufactured or not. The reason why news and all these things cater to our lowest level here is because it's the lowest common denominator. It's easy to do. If you have to go somewhere and get people to hate someone, it's a lot easier to do than get them to love their life or be grateful, which is the top here. But we see that we have resentment, blame, limited, anger, fear, everything's limited from a place of scarcity constantly. This is where we see these low. We can track this in a brain. It's not just, we can look at, we can do an EEG, look at where your frequency's at and tell you how you're feeling roughly based on that. And almost every case, right on track with how you're feeling. And then as you sit still, we go through some of these exercises we're going to talk about in a second, you don't even need to say anything. And we can see you come up the gamma. And when you see it happen, when you look at it, you're like, wow, I'm actually like getting your brainwave, changing your frequency in real time. It's an addictive thing. And it's just your thoughts. That's all you're doing is changing your thoughts. And the more you do this, the more you go up this ladder, the more you make this happen, go changing our frequency ladder, the greater you become, the greater power you have, and the easier these thoughts become, and the more you just stay up there. People, the number one question I get asked all the time is how I stay in this place. And it's not that I stay there. I get off too. I get knocked off orbit too, but I get right back. And that's the thing. It's not how much you get off board. It's how much you get back on track and getting your frequency back in line. So now we get a little bit higher to the settling, acceptance, happiness, so to speak, where you're just accepting your life and you start to build a little bit momentum. Then we get into thinking and reasoning. This is in the alpha and beta phases where you're getting a little bit higher, a little bit smarter. And then towards the end of the alpha or towards the edge of the beta is when you start getting more unstoppable. This is when you start getting courage. You start taking, you start getting braver. You start having more confidence in your decisions and your abilities and the things that you have going for you. And ultimately, the last three things that we have, the highest you are, the best you've ever felt in your life, the highest frequency you're ever at, the best version of yourself and others is always when you have undying, overflowing your cup of these last three things: opportunity, optimism, gratitude. Opportunity for yourself and others, you see infinite opportunity. There's thousands of ways to make great things happen in your life and for others. Optimism, you generally feel better about the world. And gratitude. Gratitude is the top thing, the top feeling, the top sensation, the top thing. And I'm not the first person, we're not the first people to figure this out, but the top feeling that you have is always of gratitude. That's when you're at your highest frequency. Your brain is ultimately your highest frequency. You cannot fill yourself with gratitude. If you fill yourself with enough gratitude, you won't have room for anything else. We've talked about that state of optimism, which we're going to come back to the study of the rats. I've studied thousands of psychological studies. I've gone through thousands of books. This is one of the top three things I've ever learned. So it's a pretty qualified statement on this. They did an experiment with rats and milk. They went to see how far they would go and how far they'd swim. They'd go down, they'd come up, they'd go down, they'd come up. And then when they went down and weren't coming up and they were about to drown, they took them out. They took another group of rats, another group of 50 rats. They put them in that same milk, but they put a little island out there so the rats could rest on it and they could keep swimming. Then they took the first 50 that had no island, the second 50 that had an island. They put them into a giant tub with no island. And that first group went to where they went before pretty much. Then they gave out and they almost died. The second group went twice as far. And they actually studied their heart rate, their circulation, their respiration, their breathing. It was actually better. You understand what's happening? The only way that could be explained is through the image they had of that island, optimism. It actually physically changed what their bodies were capable of. They got less tired. They kept going. They had more, not just more energy, but it's like the frequency of just that rat's tiny little thought of having optimism was enough to propel it to have twice the strength, twice the muscle mass, twice the muscle strength, the muscle fibers. Like, how is that possible? Because mind over matter. Ultimately, optimism, that I've always remembered that because it is the cost, it is the value, the tangible value of optimism. Someone who's believing the break's coming, the next thing's coming. It's not even a break because I'm just dancing the whole way. But just having that attitude of the way you're doing something, 100 people are doing something, one person at the right frequency with the right thoughts being triggered has nothing but undying optimism. Everyone else is just asking, are we there yet? Are we there yet? Are we there yet? And that guy is just enjoying the ride. And that's ultimately where you want to be. So when we have your negative, we have delta theta, then we have neutral, and then we have the positive. The main thing to look at here is what happens when we contract or we expand. Whenever we have any contraction in our thoughts, in our physicality, in our body, we can see the frequency actually change. It goes from the high frequency to a very low frequency, much slower, much more predictably bad, right? We could see this downward descent. And then here we have expansion. So it's not just a contraction of your mind or your body, but it's also a contraction of your potential. You have less optimism, less opportunity. You don't believe that you believe these things are shrinking, not expanding. Everything expands. All your thinking, your reasoning, your happiness, your acceptance, everything becomes better as you expand, as you raise your frequency versus getting worse. Ultimately, the very top, we have joy, hope, passion, knowledge, enthusiasm, appreciating, expecting, creating, always looking for great outcomes constantly. This is where we want to be, and this is what happens where you ultimately automatically are when you're at the gamma place. You only do things with passion. You have a hunger for knowledge. You have an enthusiasm towards life. I've always said the only two things anyone ever needs to do is go through we have a weekly log that I check in with students and anybody, or we have our meetings, our huddles. Just do those things with enthusiasm. We have that sign up that says enthusiasm makes up for everything, right? That's where you're at when you're at the gamma place. You're in a place of ecstasy. You're in a place of the highest, it's just all great things, right? That's where you want to be. The place down here with low, it's frustration, disappointment, weariness, worry, always overwhelmed, expecting and creating the worst outcomes. We all know what that's like, right? Especially whenever someone tells me how hard they're working, I know that it's going to be a nightmare to talk to them. And their level of LC is rubbing off on everyone around them. And it creates a huge issue that a lot of people, you could smell it from a mile away. You just might not know it. But this is what happens. These are all things we're looking at with our frequency and by changing our frequency. So there's a couple simple things you can do, a couple simple drills you can do to get here to the LC part. The formula for being what we call the LC stuff is to focus entirely on yourself. The more focus you have on yourself, the easier it is to contract and to bring yourself down. Number 2 is always focus on the short term, the immediate short term. Every bad decision you've made generally in your life is because the lens of time that you look at through was very short, very narrow. And number 3, focus on the lack of possibility, the lack of potential. You do those 3 things, generally, that's what will bring you from whatever state, whatever frequency you're at, and it'll bring you down to ultimately resentment. Resentment is the core item. It's like you're just mad and bitter at everyone in the world. The opposite is the case as well. That's the formula for the LC. What about the formula for the badass, or for reaching the level of gamma, as they call it? Focus on others, not yourself. Focus on others. Focus on the long term. Instead of looking at the time right now, look at time later. The ultra high achiever, if you look at the higher up the income ladder you go, the higher up the achievement ladder you go, the broader of a timeline people are looking at. They're looking at centuries ahead of time. The Dalai Lama said something like the human is the only creature in the world capable of thinking centuries ahead of its time. And what I would add to that is, what are you doing with that gift? How often are you thinking about that? Focus on the endless possibility, endless potential. Just by changing your focus and thinking about that. Focus on others, how you can help others. Focus on the long term, 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. We have this little experiment we do with calling people. When somebody's trying to close a deal, I got to call this realtor, I got to call this lender, and I got to close them now. I got to get a deal done, in the next 24 hours or whatever. That's one thing. If you say, you know what? Let me talk to a couple realtors today, and let me find someone that I can build a relationship with that's going to last 10 years, 20 years. What happens? All of a sudden, just thinking about that, did it change the way you feel? Did it change? Because if you were hooked up to a machine, these are things that change your gamma. I'm going to do a couple experiments in a second. Then you'll feel your gamma change. You'll feel your thought, your frequency change just by a few thoughts. That's one of them. Just thinking, you know what? I call people up for 10 or 20 years. And that's why we want to start, we're going to get to this later, but we want to start saying these things. Wear this stuff on your sleeve. Start saying things like, when I call, I saw your number, I saw you ran an ad. I just thought I'd give you a call, because what I do is when I call someone up, instead of looking at how I can make money right now or something like that, I just look at someone, how can I build a friendship? How can I help somebody out and build a relationship that's going to last the next 20 years? That's what I look for. That's why I gave you a call. And I don't know, if that were the case, how would this conversation look, or how would it be? First of all, no, they're not getting any calls like that, right? But the other thing you do is have them build a bridge to you. They're catering to you. How would they be worth 20 years, or how would they prove that they're worth a 20-year relationship? But just by using these conversations, using these words, you not only raise your own frequency, but you raise the frequency of other people. And I want to be totally clear. This frequency is something we can track. This isn't like, just having a better attitude. We want to have specific thoughts that bring your gamma up. And we're going to talk about how to tell that your gamma is up if you're not using an EEG machine, which you can do, and you can see it. But you can also tell, that's why I'm going through these feelings and the ideas and the thoughts that you have, because this is how you know you're there, right? Right now, like wherever you're at, you want to be, we always talk about connect to the deep current. We've been talking about this lately. I've been so obsessed with this idea. We're going through that book, Explorers, about these icebergs in 1800s. I think they saw them. And they were going against the waves. They were going against the current. They were going against the wind and everything. How was that possible? Because the only way ships were doing that was with these like multi-billion-dollar engines and stuff. And yet these icebergs that have none of that, they're floating right across the, right into the, the teeth of the wind. And how is that even, like, that doesn't even seem like it's possible. But after like 150 years or something, they figured out that there's what's called the current at the top, but there's also the deep current. And the deep current is like 20, 30, 40, 50, 100 times more powerful than the current at the top of the ocean, right? And so when that iceberg's connected to that deep ocean, man, when you're connected to what you're supposed to be doing, the stuff at the top ain't no thing, man. It's not going to bother them. And I always thought, as soon as we read that, I thought, that is how the best people are among us, right? Nothing that's happened at the top, the surface stuff that affects everyone else, it means nothing to them because they're connected to the deep current. This is how you do that. Get yourself to the place of gamma and then you start using your words, change your dialogue with your people around you so you bring up the frequency. People come around you, they instantly have a higher frequency just from being around you. I've been saying this a lot, especially now. If somebody goes to bigria.com, anybody who's in any kind of business and they're not blown away by like the brilliance or the next level, like insanely groundbreaking, like if they don't feel like that, I get it. Okay, I do. First of all, it's all free, so it doesn't cost you anything. But you need to move on because we are that for other people. And I only want to focus on those people because those are the people we have the best results with. And I say that even now, like in this video right now, with anything, don't waste your time on anything that's not connecting you to the deep current. If it's not doing that for you, move on. If I'm not doing that for you, move on. You got to get your frequency up. And we're going to talk more about this later. But once you do that, it changes everything you're doing. Okay, so this is something called, so ultra high achievers look at time differently. The LC will think this week, today, or the next 5 minutes. That's why they smoke. That's why they drink. That's why they do other things. Not that everyone again, we deal with addiction. We do work with a lot of people in addiction. And the important thing, especially one of the first things we look at, is map out the LC versus the badass. We use different words, but sometimes not a lot. A lot of times that's the exact verbiage we use. What is the formula for being an LC? What's the formula for now? We look at the thoughts. What are the thoughts that trigger this guy? What are the thoughts that trigger this guy? Everybody's got a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde in them. So please take no disrespect for the addiction stuff. And I had the same stuff too, man. I could eat an entire cheesecake from Cheesecake Factory. After eating a whole meal at P.F. Chang's, it was brutal. People used to come get me from my house, take me out to eat so they could show their friends, like, you cannot believe what this guy's going to eat. You will almost always make the worst decisions of your life on impulse. The quickest way to adjust this is with time. Start focusing on different time. To release serotonin, dopamine, and take control of your mental pharmacy, you just need to control your frequency. This is one of the most important things. Anna was talking earlier about how she got her son off of antidepressants. Her oldest son, and this is the process. If you understand your frequency, we know this now through neurology and through neurologists and neurosurgeons that can tell you that the whole point of the scary part about messing with the brain is that it might never be the same again. The first thing they look at after brain surgery, the top thing they want to look at is make sure the glands and the releasing of these neurotransmitters, it's the chemicals out of your brain, they're working properly. Because if this is a little bit off, if your serotonin or dopamine's up, man, the reason why people are addicted is because of a dopamine hit. You get that little that hit, like, oh, I need it, I gotta do it, right? It's the same reason why people they gotta watch Netflix, they gotta whatever. Then you get around other people that do it. There's something called binge watching. This is crazy where LCs get together online now because of COVID and they watch these 10 episodes of a show in a row. It's 10, 12, 15 hours. Imagine if they did something more productive. Man, imagine what they could do, but who's got the time for that, right? But the reason people get addicted to it is because of the dopamine. Serotonin is what makes you feel good. It's what you fill your body with when you have a feel-good feeling. Gamma is the most important thing to do to release serotonin. You get the higher frequency and it releases it. Your body knows that you feel better because you're releasing this, you're making sure it feels better by having this chemical release. The dopamine hits are really important because this is what can control your addiction. If you can get addicted to the right behaviors, imagine what would happen to your life if you got addicted to just working out instead of cakes and donuts or whatever. Controlling and choosing addictions can be done in seconds. We're going to talk about this later. Here's an exercise that has cured heroin addiction and a lot more. This is what we call the time octopus. Basically, here's the way to look at this. You guys, everyone's following everything we're talking about, right? Should we take a break? Should we keep going? Yes? Okay, does anybody think we should take a break? Because I'll take one. No? You guys are, okay, good. Okay, I get kind of lost in stuff, babe, so I just want to stop me if we're going too much. Okay, so we basically have the time octopus here. We have pleasure, we have pain on one side, right? So at first what happens is that for the bad decisions, we get an instant boost of pleasure, right? This is the octopus because you guys have come up with this, because if you look at it sideways, it looks like an octopus. So first you have pleasure. You smoke a cigarette, you drink, you eat a donut. You have pleasure but this is a very short period of time. This baseline right here is time, right? But you have pleasure for a second, but then right after that, it immediately falls off. It's very steep, almost 90 degrees. And then after that, that action, that donut, that cigarette, that watching Netflix or whatever, if we just start looking at more time, what happens? Now you get no return at all. It's nothing but pain, right? So the pleasure you got was only for a few seconds, and now the pain you have of having that donut in your system, eating that cheesecake, watching that Netflix instead of working on your business, or getting that argument or watching porn or whatever, is once you're done masturbating, right, the return of that time is nothing but negative. There's no pleasure associated. Now, if we look at good activities, the things we want to do, it's the exact opposite. We have a short experience of pain. The most important thing to realize is that this is the only reason you're not doing it. The only reason you're not working out, the only reason you're not walking, the only reason you're not building your business, the only reason you're not reaching out, building relationships, the only reason you're not doing the stuff you should do is because of this tiny little pain. This tiny pain that you feel at the very beginning. It's only at the very beginning, and it's a tiny, tiny, tiny amount. It only gets smaller and smaller and smaller the better. Well, I'll get to that in a second. But that's the only reason you're not doing it. It's that tiny amount of pain. Because look what happens right after that. First of all, the pain goes away instantly. Once you start making calls, once you start doing whatever, it's amazing how quick the pain dissipates. And then after that, what do you have? Nothing but a high ROI. This is why we call it the octopus. You look at it sideways, it kind of looks like an octopus, right? But nothing but pleasure. All you get afterwards is nothing but pleasure. You could take anything. Should you watch Netflix or should you make calls? Just think about this right now. This is the drawing we use, the drawing you were talking about earlier. Just first, all we've got to do is realize that what we're looking at is a very, very short term of pleasure or pain. That's it. After that, if you skip ahead, let's say you're going to make calls or you're going to watch Netflix for the next 20 minutes. In 20 minutes, everything, if it wasn't for that initial pain, you would never decide to watch Netflix instead, because everything after the 20 minutes, and look, it's obvious. Obviously, you want to do the blue and not the red, right? This is the good things versus the bad things. And the healthy stuff will have initial pain, reward later. Unhealthy stuff has initial pleasure and pain later. And that is ultimately how everything works. It's understanding that if you just focus on this moment right here, get past that first 5 minutes, 10 minutes, just focus on this moment right here, you're cured. Now, what happens over time is we have the time octopus inverted. So this is where you need to be. Why does somebody who works out every day work out every day? The number one reason is because they work out every day. They have momentum, right? But also they have dopamine that's being hit. What I always say that the reason you can eat whatever you want and still lose all the weight is because what you're going to want to eat is different than what you want to eat right now. Because eventually, remember, the blue is the good, the red is the bad. The blue gives you pleasure. You'll actually like eating vegetables. You'll actually like making calls. You'll actually like building your business. It'll give you an instant dopamine hit. And then that goes away for a second, but then afterwards, what happens? The same thing. It's only high lows. And then what happens when you're healthy? Does eating bad stuff feel good? No, the opposite. It's actually painful, right? It's actually painful to eat cake. It's painful to watch Netflix. I don't have any problem not watching movies. I have no idea what movies people are talking about. And people are like, oh my gosh, how can you? It is actually painful for me to sit down and watch Netflix or watch porn or watch a movie or something. It's actually like why am I doing this, right? That's where you want to be, because the dopamine for me, what fires together wires together in your brain. And if you fire together a good time with watching porn or Netflix or whatever, all this stuff, not to hate on Netflix, but you know what I mean, that will eventually become connected. You'll attach the good feeling. We're all kind of like the salivating dogs. They would ring the bell and give them food, ring the bell, give them food, ring the bell, give them food. They would ring the bell and the dog would start salivating because they connected the bell with food. Then they used a pitchfork, a neutral item, and the dog started salivating because they connected what fires together, wires together. And in your brain, my brain, we're all the same. But eventually, and it doesn't take that long, it only takes about 3 to 5, 7 days maximum, the opposite will happen. When you eat healthy, you feel healthier, you feel better. A healthy body needs less sleep. You wake up, you stretch better, you breathe better, you go to the bathroom much quicker. You don't have time to read, right? Because your digestive system's working a lot better. You have less headaches. All your health issues improve. You look better, right? But at first, it kind of sucks. Like, oh gosh, I don't want to eat salads, right? But quickly, salads are more preferable. You prefer a salad to the chocolate cake, right? This is what we have the time octopus inverted. This is where you want to be, where the good stuff, if this is what it looked like, why would you ever eat cake, right? And there's millions of people that don't, and this is why, because it doesn't give them that pleasure. And wherever you're at, the fact that people can get addicted to smoking or drinking and lie to their family and friends and ruin lives, the fact that people get addicted to that stuff tells you the human being can get addicted to anything, right? This is how we break that chain and we can reverse it. Just go the 3 to 5 days, keep this in mind for first, and then keep the inverted octopus in mind. Eventually, the things you hate right now will be the things you love. The way that you might avoid making calls, it'll give you a dopamine hit like it does to me. I actually am addicted to it. I love doing it. I love cold calling, and people thought I was crazy, but now Anna and many other people love doing it because they see what difference it can make. This is really what you want to focus on. Get to this point, because then the bad stuff doesn't take its toll on you. You like it. Healthy stuff, initial pleasure, reward later. Unhealthy stuff, initial pain, pain later. Why would you do the unhealthy stuff? Whether it's physically or mentally or for your business or whatever, you wouldn't. And this is how you get rid of this. And it's essentially where you need no discipline. You don't need any hard work. People think it needs discipline or hard work. That stuff's overrated. Ultimately, it's got to be a game, like gamification. Why do people sit around and play games for hours and hours? It gives them a dopamine hit. It's actually hard to not do it. And the more you look at your real life, like a comic book, we do comic book narration, right? Or a video game, the easier this will be to do. Choosing your addiction, that's how you're doing it. Basically, the difficulty, which is all perceived, none of this stuff is difficult. And if you're in America, you don't know what difficulty is, man. So if we take this here, the difficulty, it's all perceived, it's all in your head. That difficulty goes up, or the perceived difficulty goes down, and you go to a place where everything is easy, right? You get everything gets easier and easier and easier. The more dopamine you have, the more it's gamified, the more you have addiction to it, because now all of a sudden everything's becoming easier. It becomes less and less difficult. It's all perceived, but now it actually becomes the reward itself. The work becomes the reward itself. You're not asking, are we there yet? You're just enjoying the trip, and you actually enjoy the drive, right? That's where you want to be. This is where you can get the gamified. You can choose your addiction. You can do this with anything that you want to do, any habit you want to change, any activity. All a policy is for your company is just a habit for your company. It's a ritual. You can do this with anything that you want to have, any behavior that you want to attach good things to. You can go through this process, and your progress becomes something that you're addicted to. Neuroplasticity, your brain is always under construction. Neuroplasticity is always happening. Just like the internet, your thoughts, interactions are training your brain on how to build and model itself. We've seen this happen. Your brain is basically like a big city, but there's no roads built yet, right? And what you think about, you decide what roads, what buildings, what locations to build based on your thoughts and your focus. That's why we all have the, superhighway to misery usually, and, a dirt road to great, to gamma, right? Where you want to be. But the more you change that, the more you do it on purpose, the more of a superhighway that becomes. And as soon as you wake up, you can get in that mode immediately, get to where you want to be, change your frequency seconds, and get to where your brain starts remodeling around this new reality. All the potential and possibility you have collapses to reality once you focus on a single thought or idea. And your head right now, again, thought control is the single most important thing. Hopefully that's becoming like crystal clear. It's all like the single biggest point I think of today's entire class. But you have, like all of us have this spectrum, right? That wave of possibility of things you could think. And depending on what you think about, it's going to change how you feel. It's going to change what you do. You've got all these things out in front of you, right? But all those realities collapse once you focus on one idea, one thought. And the more you do that, the more you focus on the ones that raise your frequency, the easier it'll be to think about them, and the more you'll do it automatically. There's no way to avoid participating. Surrendering or giving control is a choice in itself. It's a default choice for the LC. Again, you are doing this right now with your brain. It is modeling itself. You're focusing on thoughts. You're already doing this. So it's not like, oh, I'll do it tomorrow. I'll do it next week, which is ironic given what we're talking about. But you won't. This is also, the time octopus explains why procrastination happens. Only because of that initial pain. That's the only reason you're doing it. But again, there's no way to avoid this. You're doing it anyway. Nothing says more about you than what you think about the most. And this is why we want to focus our thoughts on that. Our body and our mind will change itself. The body of your brain, will change itself around the things that you're thinking about the most, right? Okay, so how to raise your thinking and make it contagious. No, it would have had it before. Yes, no. I'm trying to look at the camera. I'm trying to make eye contact with everybody. I'm doing what I can here. Are you sure we don't want to take a break? No, we're good? Keep going? Okay, how to raise your thinking to make it contagious. This is when we talk about raising your frequency, some of the thoughts that trigger it. It's not just about raising your frequency yourself, getting your thoughts to where they need to be, but you want to do it in such a manner that when you talk to people, the way you communicate, you explain that you're coming across to them with that same frequency. When they go through your stuff, they should be like, holy smokes, this is exactly the kind of thinking, exactly the kind of mother grabber that I want to be talking to. How to raise your thinking. One of the things we talk about is a mission board. How many of you are using the mission board right now? Okay, I'm gonna go a little bit faster because I know, but this is like really, this is great stuff. I shouldn't go so fast because this is really good stuff. But the mission board, it's one of the easiest things. Man, I've been in real estate forever, man. I've been doing stuff forever. Nobody does this stuff. It's not just about real estate. It's about anything else. Imagine you have a conversation with somebody. Right after you talk to them, you get a quick email. Right after we talk to them, we send them a quick text, a quick video as well. But we want to send this mission board as well. This is one of the things we include in our propaganda package. We'll just talk about one part of your mission. Here's the algorithm. Where you were, where you are now, and where you want to be. Very simple. Then we capture both those with a picture and a caption explaining why. So use a picture for each thing here, or at least one picture, and then we have the mission. So here's what imagine this is an arrow going straight up here, right? This is this Anna's? My son was born with special needs and his test scores are, so imagine you just talked to her on the phone, you're a realtor, whatever, and you get this included in that testimonial package, right? My son was born with special needs and his test scores are way below his peers. I'm not seeing any pictures here, but you would have the picture here as well. With years of work, we developed a system and his scores are catching up and even ahead of his peers in some areas. My goal is to have a proven process where we can have special needs students not just score normal, but far above. Okay, that was one of the first iterations. And then my mission, this is why I'm building the world's largest organization of special needs business owners, because I want to be able to help families like mine do what I did and turn their special needs kids into overachievers, right? That mission there, that's a hook, right? This is one of those things, even when I say it now, I asked her, we did try to do some math, how much money is made from that hook, saying that we're building the world's largest organization of special needs business owners. She just got a call from a woman in Tennessee with a land deal that it's going to make her probably about $100,000, and she got that number over a year ago. But she said, as soon as I heard they're building the world's largest organization of special needs, I kept that number. I said, if there's something that comes up, I'm going to do it. That's how you're raising somebody's game. You're raising their frequency up by talking and using words like this. This is one example, one of the early examples. We have much better. Okay, so I was in an abusive relationship for over 15 years, and I thought there was no way out. That's where I was, where you were. Real estate gave me the freedom to finally leave and raise my kids in a safe home environment. Where you are now, right? That's where she is now. My goal is to have my 3 kids never tolerate or create a toxic situation like they saw growing up, right? This is my goal now. So again, you see the algorithm, right? This is where I was, where I am now, where I want to be. And then we have the mission. My mission. That's why I started the first Real Estate Investor Association at a women's shelter, because my mission is to help other families escape abusive and toxic environments with business building. You get what I'm saying? This is the kind of stuff that raises people up. I love watching magicians with my disability. But with my disability, I was always told I would never be able to perform like them. With the new treatment, I've successfully completed 3 shows for the first time in my life, where I am now. Now, where do I want to be? My goal is to one day be able to work full-time for an entire month as a magician, right? Now, what's my mission? My mission, I'm in real estate because it helps me and helps improve my communication and confidence for my magic shows. It's also why I'm using my real estate skills to build the world's first society of special needs magicians. This is, okay, so these are getting better and better. Yeah, this is exactly perfect. This is how you talk from now on, right? Imagine you talk to somebody and I'm going to go through this again. This is a little diagram with pictures. I love watching magicians. With my disability, I was always told I would never be able to perform like them. One sentence, that's where I was. Now here's where I am now. With the new treatment, I've successfully completed 3 shows for the first time in my life. Now where do I want to be? My goal is, notice the words. I loved watching with the new where I am now, and then my goal is to one day be able to work full-time for an entire month as a magician. My mission, I'm in real estate because it helps improve my communication and confidence for my magic shows. This is also why I'm using my real estate skills to build the world's first society of special needs magicians. Holy smokes! Holy smokes, this is how you get mother grabbers eating out of the palm of your hand, man. Okay, is this another one? Why would I do this? Why would a soccer mom get into real estate? My uncle struggled with addiction, put him in jail, ruined his marriage, and nearly took his life. It was helping people through real estate that put him on the road to recovery, where I was, right? Today, we help newly released inmates and addiction recovery patients turn their lives around with real estate investing and business building. I'm doing this because I don't want any family to go through what we did. Good. I want to create a world where, this is the goal then, I want to create a world where we can eliminate the recidivism rate and addiction rate of prisoners by teaching them entrepreneur skills and social mobility. Okay? My mission, I'm in real estate because I don't want any family to go through what mine did, and I know how much of a difference real estate investing skills can make to a family creating generational wealth. Okay, this is pretty good. I see, you know what? I noticed when I was reading this today, when you added it with a little bit of where I want to be, kind of a mission. So what I would do is I tighten this up a little bit. My uncle struggled with addiction, put him in jail, ruined his marriage, nearly took his life, and was helping people through real estate to put him on the road to recovery. I would be a little more specific about the real estate. Like, it was only when he learned business building through real estate that put him on the road, but that's good. Today we help newly released inmates, or today, my uncle, because I don't really know what he's doing, is he involved with that stuff? So that's what we can, you got the right idea, but we want to massage a little bit, include the uncle here, because whenever you talk about somebody, you want to talk about the win. Like when we talk about special needs kids who's struggling at the test, what's the contrast to that, right? Like, where's the win with this? So he's still clean, right? Okay, good. Yeah. So yeah, we don't want to use that. Like, he used to be crazy addicted, and now he's still, I don't want to say that, right? And also, like, when we're teaching them by teaching them entrepreneur skills and social mobility, that's great. But we want to make sure that it's clear that you're going there and teaching them. It's not like, if you call me for work, I'm going to have a bunch of crackheads work on your house. You know what I mean? Like, we want to make it like, it's like, I know that's not what you're doing, but you get what I'm saying? Like, we could tighten this up a little bit. But this is good. You guys get the process, right? You guys get the overall process. Everyone gets this, right? So this is how we create. This is one of the ways we use our hook, our mission, and we raise people's frequency up immediately. That's what happens. So here's some high frequency drills. Here's how to get thinking set up in your brain right now. We're going to go through these drills, and we're going to have our worksheet that basically it's just these questions. So you can do this right now. Go through get this going down right now. This is how you get your high frequency thought, get your trigger and your gamma. So think about this. If you could go back 1 year, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, what daily habit would you change? What would you have done 10 years ago every day up until now? A daily habit that you would want to have done. You would want the accumulation of the results of that habit, of that behavior for 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, or whatever. What's a daily thing you would have started of? And then you could just, jump back in the DeLorean, come back to today, and you would have the result of doing this one thing every day. What would it be? What would that thing be? Maybe it'd be reading, maybe it'd be exercising, maybe it'd be quit smoking, maybe it'd be like, what would you change or do or whatever? Maybe you'd be better to your wife. Imagine if you wrote a love letter or just a letter of gratitude to your kids or to your wife every day for the last 10 years, 5 years, to your husband for the last, whatever. Imagine how different things would be, right? So think of a thing like that. Then ask yourself, what would be different in your life right now if you had done that, right? And this gives you an idea of if you could live your life over, what you would want to change. It starts putting on the right path of like, these are the things I should start creating in my life now. When were you the best version of yourself? Go back and think about that. When were you the highest producing version of yourself? What movies were coming out? What songs were you listening to? What were you doing? Usually, for most people, they were taking care of their body. They were the healthiest version of themselves. But when were you the best version? Now, how would that person be living your life right now? What would be specific differences they would do? What would they be doing right now? How would they wake up? What would they be doing? Start thinking about that, and it starts to move your frequency up, right? You could see it because you start getting more and more potential, right? If your child wrote your eulogy, imagine we're at your funeral, your child or somebody you care about, somebody equivalent, wrote your eulogy at your funeral, what would it say? Just think about that for a second. What would it say? How would it start? How would it end? Who else would speak, and what would they say? Think about these things for a second. One of the things we do before, one of the experiments we did when we had the EEG experiments, we had people list it. We call it the monster in me. Basically, most people think the monster is this giant, terrible thing. It's this 1 million foot tall thing with 1,000 teeth. Each of them are 1,000 feet high, and you're this tiny little guy, right? That's how most people think their problems are, especially in America, where everything's awful and terrible, and you're just kicking, you're down at the bottom. And I don't mean like everyone in America is like that, but I mean that this concept. When you look at the reality of America, the fact is we should be the happiest, most loving people on earth, and we should be fulfilled with nothing but gratitude. But it's like the exact opposite. The only people living that life, ironically, are the people that come from other countries. But the thing is, we have people think about your challenges. Think about all your challenges, how they're this giant monster, you're tiny little you, right? And then we have 3 little things we do, 3 experiments. One is we say, okay, we'll give them a short motivational speech and see how differently they feel. How do you feel about your potential? How much more potential do you have? And they think, well, maybe, I could do a little bit more or whatever. Then the second thing is always a new experiment some people say, write down a schedule, or because if you fail to plan, you plan to fail or whatever. Do some other gimmicky thing that people talk about motivation. The third thing is we don't talk about your problems at all. We don't get into that at all. All we do is say this. Why don't you think about the weather on the day that you die? Just think about that for a second. The Roman generals used to have somebody, the highest person in Roman, the highest person in Rome, when Rome was a superpower, the highest person in basically in the world was an army general who would come back from a military victory. They'd have these parades, they'd last for days and weeks, and he'd have women at his disposal, and people would be naming their kids after him. But during that whole time, you know what they had? They had someone who's behind him, whose entire job was to whisper 2 words, memento mori, means remember, you must die. All this is temporary. And that person was far beneath them in status, class, and influence. It'd be like a common slave boy, right? You've got this commoner whispering in your ear. You're like the big shot guy. You got this commoner saying, memento mori, remember, you're going to die. Death is certain. All this is temporary. Don't take it too seriously. It helps keep you grounded, but also gives you perspective. There should be nothing that gets you more motivated than the fact that everything is coming to an end. Every breath, like Seneca said, every passing moment goes where else if not to death. I think about that a lot. But specifically, just think about the day you're going to die. What's the weather going to be like? What time of year is it going to be? Just think about that. And then we come back to people and instantly they have more potential than ever before. Just thinking about your death can fill you and get your gamma up there. I've had many other experiments. We've had one of my cousin who went to Silicon Valley, made a couple bucks, and then he was basically retired and he wanted to get to the FBI initially. But he went to Silicon Valley to get money. So then he got into the NYPD. He was a detective in the NYPD. This was Halloween day, 2003 or 2004. Was his first day. He went out and a kid fell on the train tracks. It was like a young, very like maybe a teenager, 20, 25 years old, something like that. Very young person had fallen on the train tracks. A train had run them over and it had run them over in such a way that they got basically smushed from their chest down, from like right beneath their nipples down. And they were totally fine. They were in no pain at all. So looking at it, like, look, if we move the train, it's like spaghetti. You're going to die. If we lift up the train, you're going to die. You're probably going to die any second right now. We don't know what to do. And the guy's like, well, I don't know what to do either. I don't know what's going to happen, but I guess just move the train and see what happens. And they said, yeah, but there were EMTs there, paramedics. There was even a surgeon there. And they all said, you're going to die. Like, we don't even know how you're alive right now. But he was totally fine. Wasn't any pain at all. And he's about to die though, right? On the train tracks, right? Just fell on the train tracks, about to die. So my cousin's partner said, hey, before we move the train, do you want us to call anybody? And he said, yeah, I want you to call my mom. So they called his mom and she didn't answer and he left her a voicemail. And I want you to think about that because I often think about how many times that mother must have listened to that voicemail. Like every gap, because I think about that with my son, like I don't know how much time we have, but I think like when I think about that, man, I get right up there. Like right now, the difference between me having done the stuff I've done with like before the adoption, even before it was even official, I knew it was going to happen. I knew I was supposed to do it. I just knew. How did I know? I don't know. I just knew. But like, it's these thoughts, right? It's triggering these thoughts, right? Imagine, I'd ask you this question. If you knew that you have 30 seconds to live, you have one phone call, you're going to leave them one voicemail. The voicemail is going to cut off after like 30 seconds. Who would you call and what would you say? Don't say it. Don't write it down. Just think about it. Who would you call and what would you say? Now, come back and tell me, how big do your problems seem right now? That's what gamma does. That's what gets you at the right place. A high frequency, right? Instantly your problems are, this ain't nothing, man. My potential, I've got 100 times more I can do, right? That's what gamma does. Memento mori, thinking about death. There's also some other examples I've had with, when I was thinking that, there was a young lady, I won't say her name, no real names, by the way, if we're on the mic, because it's being recorded. We're still recording, right? But I think about, it's crazy. In the last 2-3 years, I know more people who are dead now than I ever did my entire life before. And almost all of them, they're quite young people that have these, when I think about that stuff, man, right now we've got, who with the butterfly skin, which is like the AMA says the single most painful condition a human being can have. I think about him, man, and my skin stuff, my stuff. Like I would never have recorded, done the stuff with all this stuff, the goop on my face and like the fact that I've got itching and bleeding. I'm actually bleeding right now. But now it's like, man, this ain't no thing. It's changed my perspective. That's how you get your gamma up. If you could solve any one problem in the world, what would it be and who would you solve it for? If you could just snap your fingers. What do you feel entanglement? We talk about quantum entanglement. What do you think is your soulmate? Like what activities? What do you always feel yourself moving towards? What are your constants variables? Who would be, if there's a trillion versions of you, what would be a constant? Who are the people in your lives that would be constants? No matter how many times you go through this, I always meet you. I know I always meet you. And start telling those people that. Say, you know what? If there's a trillion versions of this out there, every single one, I meet you. We find each other somehow. We make it happen. I know we do. I can feel it. Start leading with that stuff. That's how we get to the gamma. If you were a superhero, who would you help and why? What would be your superpower? What is your lark? So, Bill Murray was a comedian. I know we got to explain this, but he was not an attractive guy. He was told he was not a funny guy. He was told, and so one day he decided, I'm going to kill myself. And he walked outside. He said, I can't do this anymore. I'm not going to be an actor. I'm not good looking enough to be a leading man. I'm not funny enough to be a comedian. I'm going to kill myself. And he walked out, and he was going to kill himself. He was going to go jump in the river. On the way there, he went to a museum, just walked through the security, just walked in. He was going to kill himself, right? And he saw this painting called the Song of the Lark. It's a painting of a woman who is like not a slave, maybe a slave, but working in the field all day, no shoes, no socks, and she's sitting there in this this like kind of quiet state, but doesn't have much going on in her life, positive. But in the background is the sunset or the sunrise, and he thought that somebody that is in that situation, right? Like here's someone who's in doesn't have much hope, much prospects. He's light years ahead of her. And yet there's the sunrise still coming up. The sun's still coming up. And that painting actually saved his life. He decided not to kill himself. And he thought, you know what? I want to have something like that. I want to have a piece of art like that moves people in some way, that really what you can do for others is really ultimately what matters. And it was after that he came up with his movie, Groundhog Day, which is the best movie he's made easily. And the Groundhog Day is such an epic movie. When I say Groundhog Day, there's so many movies made today that are basically Groundhog Day. When they made Edge of Tomorrow with Tom Cruise, they said it's Groundhog Day meets Independence Day. There's other like Happy Death Day. It's Groundhog's Day basically. There's a lot of movies like that. The day just repeats. There was an entire series that Taye Diggs, I think, or somebody was on that it was just the day was repeating. But the movie, the whole point of the movie, Groundhog Day, is that he's living every day. He thinks it's hell. He thinks it's like the worst thing ever. And then the woman's like, well, you could actually help people. And that's how he solves, how life is ultimately helping people. How ironic that what he wanted when he was killing himself is to be able to touch people the way the painting touched him, and then he made a movie that did him the same way. William James was going to kill himself, same thing, in a bad place. Then he saw a slave that was out there working. But I say that because what the Song of the Lark did for Bill Murray, for years, he just kept thinking back to that painting. It brought him right back up to where he needs to be. He's talked about this many times, that whenever he'd get down or anything, he'd think about that thing and it'd give him endless energy. He didn't describe it as frequency, but the same way. William James is the father of American psychology, but he had back spasms. He got arguments with his dad, and he was leaving his house one day to kill himself because he was kind of a loser, going nowhere in his life. He saw a slave who had been a freed slave, and he became a millionaire. And the freed slave became a millionaire. They asked him, what's the biggest secret? He said, just treat everything like it's your fault. Take full responsibility. So William James said, you know what? I'm not going to kill myself today. Instead, I'm going to take a 1-year experiment. All I'm going to think about is this one slave who I am so far, how inspiring. I have a million times what he has. But the way he was able to do it is because he took responsibility. That's how he took responsibility, became the father of American psychology. $10 million. Jim Carrey talks a lot about the law of attraction and manifestation, all that stuff. He wrote a check for $20 million, put it in his dad's hands at his coffin when he died, and he became the first actor to ever make, with Cable Guy, $10 or $20 million. He always thought about that, the $10 million thing. The point is, what thought gets your blood stirred, right? What gets you moving? What gets you out of bed like a bullet? There's other things. We got to move forward here. You guys want to take a break? No? Okay. The 5 main brainwaves. The frequency will go through your body as your body is always listening. That frequency that you have with your thoughts, you are a magnet to good and bad things based on your frequency. Like attracts like. The RIS determines what in your world you should pay attention to. It takes and creates from the world meaning. It creates, it takes, it tells you what's important in the world. It will find those things for you. Water. You're like basically a wireless wave. You're sending out this wireless, like a wireless router, right? You're sending out waves. Your radio station or a website, I guess you could be both. You're both sending and receiving based on the address. So if you ever go to a website, what is a website but an IP address? But we type it in as like bigria.com, but it's the computer just sees an address. But that is essentially the way your frequency is. You are sending out a signal like a radio station. You're tuning into the right radio station, and then you're going to send and receive once that channel is connected based on your frequency and where you want to be. Your life is a perfect sculpture of your thoughts, as we talk about. You want to be high and stay in the highest places possible. Adjusting your frequency of thought does 3 very important things. Number 1, you raise your own level of frequency of thought. Number 2, you raise the level of the tone of thought for others around you. You raise the tone of thought of others around you. You help those you raise your own stuff, you raise the frequency for other people, but you also indirectly help people because you help those people raise the level of tone for other people just by saying what you're going to say. I'll give you an example. Ultra high achievers throughout history have understood this. This is Daniel Burnham. He's a pioneer of cities and skyscrapers and everything. I love this. We have this printed out actually. Make no little plans. They have no magic to stir men's blood, and probably themselves will not be realized. Make big plans, aim high, and hope and work. Remembering that a noble logical diagram, once recorded, will never die, but long after we are gone, be a living thing, asserting itself with ever-growing insistency. Remember that our sons and grandsons are going to do things that would stagger us. Let your watchword be your order and your beacon, your beauty. Daniel Burnham. With practice, it's become a lot easier. No, but we got that other class coming in. Okay, so we've got to go through these. All right, this is why you should speak in hooks. With practice, it's become easier. Silicon Valley billionaire stealing all the talent. How's he doing it? So we got asked to come in and talk to a guy who was stealing all the talent. He was getting all the high-paying people, and he was getting them in his business. So I went in, not as espionage. I was actually curious. But there were 2 people I was with that were with this company that were going in kind of as spies to see what he was doing. How the company was hiring them. So first of all, this billionaire invites us to his house, his actual house, not the office. Went to his house. As soon as we got to his house, he has this long hallway to go down to where his office was going to be. And as I'm walking down this hallway, I look over on the wall on the left, and there's this giant diagram. It's like 2 TV screens tall, like 3 TV screens wide. And I'm looking at it, and it has this, at the time it was like 500 teeth, but now it's like 100 or 200 teeth. Let's say 200 teeth. There were 200 teeth to this 3D printer, and each tooth was the size of a football field. And I'm looking at it, and he comes over, and he's like, yeah, it's a 3D printer. I said, it's a 3D printer. He said, it has 200 teeth. I said, 200 teeth. He said, each tooth is the size of a football field. I was like, okay, I'm looking at this diagram. Like, okay, a 3D printer with 200 teeth, each tooth is the size of a football field. I'm like, what are you 3D printing? He said, we're making the world's first 3D printed planet. And in that second, I realized, what is he doing? That's where his frequency's at, and he raises your frequency up. When you heard me say that, maybe you've already heard that, I don't know, but as soon as you heard that, it's like, wow, as soon as he said that, I was like, man, this is how he's doing it. This is how he's stealing all the talent, because I want to be around this guy. And about 5 minutes later, the young lady had turned to me, and she said, I actually want to work here. And 5 minutes after that, the guy turned to me. He's like, if we tell him the truth, do you think he'll still hire us? Because when you traffic in thoughts like that, it becomes addictive. There's nothing more addictive, nothing more attractive, nothing more profitable than optimism, right? Everybody wants more of it. Dead Space, they said, we're making the scariest video game ever. And then because of saying that, actually people started contributing all kinds of ideas. One guy was like, there was a train I went on years ago that had the scariest sound I'd ever heard when it was coming into the port. And they actually recorded that sound for the game. The guy had worked there for years. But once you say we're making the scariest video game ever, it attracts out of people, right? Once you hit that frequency out there, that's what the frequency comes back in. Like attracts like. You get a different version of people, a different version of people out of those very people. You get what I'm saying? A different version of yourself shows up to the party. Elon Musk, very simple. I've had a cousin who works there that said the top thing Elon always looks at, there's only one thing. If you want to get his attention or you want to talk to him, the number one question he asks every day is, how is what we're doing right now? How is what we're doing today getting us closer to the world's first civilization on Mars? Right? As soon as you talk like that, if that's your tone, that's where you want to be, then it raises the tone up for everybody. Kennedy said this, we're going to have the first man on the moon by the end of the decade. When he said this in the 60s, it became reality. PC on every desk. Bill Gates, Microsoft. We're going to have a computer on every single desk. What are we, this is the time when computers are the size of a room, right? And what happens when you have a hook like that, a mission like that, when you speak in things like, this is why we say the same stuff. I've been saying the same stuff now for the last couple of years because I've realized the effect this has on people, man. It's crazy. You can build an entire business. We said, how much money do you make from saying we're building the world's largest special needs organization, or we have the #1 channel on YouTube for Indiana real estate or whatever. And it's at least, each of those things is worth at least $150,000, $200,000 at least on its own. Each one of those hooks. That's how good a hook is. Special needs business owners. We're building the largest organization of special needs business owners. That's a hook, right? We're building the largest organization. We have now the largest organization of special needs cold case detectives, where they learn to read and write and do math and computation and communication skills by solving cold cases, right? I love that, man. As I say that, it gives me chills. It gives me butterflies. That's how you raise your gamma up. And then other people, we have detectives and other people, and we're expanding to different countries. Right now, we're getting our first Bangladesh going. With our director, who's doing a great job. And when he talks to people, again, it raises our level up, raises our frequency up, these kinds of ideas. It raises his frequency up, people. But now when he talks to other people, he raises their frequency up as well. That's the three things that raising your frequency does. And it also attracts that out of other people. They start saying, oh, I want to be a part of that mission. Now we have people volunteering, saying people, detectives and other people who've retired and other forensic psychologists, other kinds of people that want to give equipment, say, oh, do you guys have a location? Do you guys have a house? We could donate supplies, university, tutorials, I don't even know what they're called, like machines and training on machines and stuff like that, and how they can, all kinds of crazy stuff, man. Detective, interrogation. There's something that it's called when you actually put it in a map. I don't know what it's called, but we're getting people that are wanting to do it. Why? Because when you put that frequency out there, when that's where your thinking is at, you instantly raise the frequency of other people. And when their frequency is high, they're in that place of gratitude. They're in that place of optimism. They're in that place of joyful giving, of wanting to be a part of a mission. This is what you're doing. That field is around you and I right now. And when you speak and traffic in high frequency thoughts, high frequency ideas, you send that out to them, it triggers that and then brings theirs up, and then they start, the resources just, it seems like they're coming out of nowhere, like they're just appearing, but they're really not. You're sending it through this water and it's coming back to you. It's really a pretty powerful thing. Museum. So our special needs museum, we have the world's first, the Midwest Museum of Special Needs Entrepreneurship, which to be honest is like in the garage, right? It's like a corner in the garage. But what's happening now, what a cool name, the Special Needs Museum. Oh my gosh, this might be one of the most brilliant ideas I've ever had, or that we've ever had, right? I shouldn't say, one of the most brilliant ideas that I've had the honor and the privilege and the gratitude. I'm deeply grateful to be able to work on. The idea came up from Rachel when we should probably take that out, but there's somebody, one of our heroes was actually involved with somebody, and somebody said, they were doing the epic flipping model where you take random items, you sell them for thousands of dollars. And somebody said, that's something that belongs in a museum. And she was like, museum? Huh? And she looked it up. As soon as she said that to me, she was like, then I started looking up how to start a museum. And it's, oh man, as soon as she said that to me, my gamma went way up. I was like, man, on my frequency, I was like, that's what we need to do. We need to start a museum, right? And what does it take? Oh man, I could talk about this forever, man, but it's like, now that we have the world's first special needs museum, because you don't have salespeople, you have curators, right? There's a whole vocabulary that comes with this. You don't have a client list or a database. You have donors and you have benefactors and people like that. And these are people that they don't have sales calls. They have, there's all kinds of BS terms like private offerings and stuff like that, where people are, go over the model real quickly. We are now contacting these special needs people that all over the country that have special needs. There's kinds of three different categories. One is that the person actually has special needs, which is rarely the case. Usually it's a family member. They start a business part-time that's not very profitable, but they have some, like some idea. They wanted to get something going with them. And then the other one is that sometimes it is profitable and they hired someone in their family or someone else that has special needs. They're usually like one or two people. Well, we want to go to those people and say, listen, we can take that business and just get ready because we could take it through the roof with you. Let's do some models and license them out. We could do MFM deals. But even if we don't do any of that, we want to take your story and use it to inspire. Why don't you send us an item or something so we get items donated to us? You know what museums do? How much money they make selling that stuff? And they sell it to they don't sell it. They do private offerings, right? So we have curators, salespeople that go out and they get these products that are donated to us. Then we turn around and take those same products, man. This is why it's only in a quarter, because you could sell them before you even put them on display. And the amounts that you're selling them for this is ridiculous. That's why when we first did this, it was like $3,000 to $5,000 a day was like, I thought that was a lot of money. Now it's like bonkers, man. But this, I just see that word museum and I just get my frequency goes through the roof, man. But now, because we're saying that, we're getting people routinely now, every day now, we're getting people that want to send us pieces so we can have exhibits, we can have artifacts and pieces and exhibits, right? Stuff to sell. Oh man, it's just so brilliant. Okay, catching sunlight. We have to build the world's first robot that catches sunlight. We're ending world hunger by growing plants 10 times faster. How? By building the world's first robot that catches sunlight and breastfeeds it to plants. Beautiful. We're building a light. It turns out that if you have, you got like 5 or 10 different, if we look at, there's 5 or 10 different genes. If you take those out, your life expectancy immediately doubles. That's why we have the largest human genome sequencing company in Sri Lanka. You could probably guess how many human genome sequencing companies there are in Sri Lanka based on that statistic. Not the point, but the hook is we're building a world where the average lifespan of a human being is 300 years. Again, if you want to fill in the world, just ask yourself, I'm building a world where blank, right? That should get your frequency up. Just think about how would the world be different if you succeeded. We have homeless. We have the largest group where we're turning homeless people into math tutors, into full-time math tutors. If you've gone through my math class, basically they become math tutors online, are able to feed themselves and able to pay rent for these places. So we have turning the largest group. We turn homeless people into full-time math tutors. I love that, man. It's beautiful. Felony CEOs. This is what we were talking about earlier, working with reducing the recidivism rate. 1 million inner city business owners under the age of 21. This is a group that we're working with, our special needs group in the inner city. This is what they're doing. We're building a world where no animal is ever harmed for food ever again. We're taking some of the veganism or being able to use meat replacements, which people cannot tell the difference, by the way. Go to Burger King, get a Beyond Meat burger. That's the future. All this stuff, man, this is stuff that takes you feel it. It's like, this is exactly where I want to be. So traffic and high frequency thoughts, traffic and ideas that stir men's blood. The more you do this, the easier and more addictive it becomes. You want to take a break? No? Are we almost done? With practice, this will become easier. Today, a young man on acid realized that all matter is merely energy condensed to a slow vibration, that we are all one consciousness experiencing itself subjectively. There's no such thing as death. Life is only a dream, and we're the imagination of ourselves. Here's Tom with the weather. This is a comedian, Bill Hicks, said, whenever you hear a story about drugs, it's always something bad, but why not something good? Today, a young man on acid realized that all matter is merely energy. I've always remembered this, condensed to a slow vibration, that we're all one consciousness experiencing itself subjectively, that there's no such thing as death. Life is only a dream, and we're the imagination of ourselves. Here's Tom with the weather. 5 scientific truths to take away from today. Double slit experiment. Your focus collapses possibility and determines reality. Actual observer's consciousness affects reality. Your focus is reality, like Yoda said. I said it first. He stole it from me. Number 2, delayed choice quantum eraser. That same observance, consciousness that we're talking about. Again, there can be no consciousness without observance. I don't think. At least I've talked to a lot of people about this. How can you have observance without consciousness, or consciousness without observance? What are you conscious of if you're not observing? What are you observing if you're not conscious of it? Anyway, can change time and space and create a minor time travel experience. This is proven. Again, this is all stuff that's proven. Quantum Zeno, we could slow down and speed things up with our focus. Our perception of time is our experience of it. And with our focus and progress, we can expand and vanish time. What what was that? Thought someone banging on there, man. My neck was I got this, no, I don't want to scratch it because it's going to get blood. I didn't want to put more on because I'm just like putting all this goop on my face, man. All right. 4, the Higgs boson. There's a field around us. It's water. It records everything you send out. It's a ripple, right? It brings people's frequency up or it brings it down, and then they bring a version of themselves based on that. Go through our frequency ladder. It's the same for everybody. If you want to trigger that best version of people, you've got to change your frequency, and it changes theirs. Neuroscience, your brainwaves determine your body's frequency, and you ripple through that field, this field that we're in. It's what you repel or attract. You are energy field within an energy field. The only question is how big or strong this is. As soon as your brain has a certain thought, as soon as you get high frequency, right, the gamma waves, it's a little field that's created. We don't know how big that field is. Steve Jobs called it the reality distortion field, that it can go across, when someone hears your voice. Right now, you and I might not be physically close to each other, but if I have even changed your thoughts even slightly up to the gamma to get a higher frequency, which hopefully I have done, then think about where that field is. When did that field of mine hit you? Was it from my verbally, and then it hit your eardrum, and that vibration is what changed your thoughts? If that's the case, then the field is infinite, because it's essentially how far your voice can travel, right? It's a pretty interesting thing. How far is my field? I constantly focus on keeping my frequency high. High thoughts, good thoughts, where you want them to be. And by doing that, and this is the same thing, this is the number one reason why we've had success with everything, is that we want to take our frequency, we go in, a lot of the stuff we do now with neurologists and stuff, but we have like real crazy, if you've gone through our book, we have people dealing with all kinds of crazy stuff. We go, let's take a map of your brain, let's look at our activity, let's go through this process several times, right? Build the business stuff up, but let's focus on our thoughts. Let's go back and get your brain checked out again and see what happened, right? Just like getting your blood pressure or your cholesterol, any of these things done, we can track it. Anything we can track, we can improve, right? But we know that the brain wave sends a ripple through your body, at least your entire body. All your cells are listening to your thoughts. How far behind does that field go? That's the question. Does it actually create things? Do you create a blue dog that you think about, or did you actually just pick it out because you told your brain it was important? That's questionable. No, we don't really know if it creates it or not. But again, it could, because it's focusing on that reality like we talked about. The wave of probability is collapsed with focus. However, even if it doesn't create it necessarily, and from your perspective, it is created. And we talk about time dilation. Again, these are the 5 things that are absolutely true. There's no question about these things. The time that my stuff on time dilation, that's kind of like, okay, maybe that's not real yet. Maybe that's just me pulling stuff out of your ass. Awesome. Okay, here's what to do from now on. Number 1, control the zombie state. You can do anything in the morning. Ali used to talk about this. The reason I can run 15 miles is because I'm still asleep. You can do anything in the morning. There was a guy, James Porco, I believe, or Peter Porco. His kid was a total nut and killed him and his wife in their sleep, took an axe to him. But he woke up the next day, went outside, this was like 2004, got the newspaper, went to the bathroom, he was bleeding all over the place. Half of his brain was cut off, or like 90% of his brain was actually cut off, his head was cut off. But because he had enough adrenaline to wake up and go through the muscle memory, he went up and got up and went around his day, and he actually died, I believe, at the breakfast table is when he finally collapsed. But that shows you that you can do anything in this zombie state. Stephen King writes 2,000 words a day. He says the secret is that it takes as much energy for me, as much effort for me to write 2,000 words every morning as it does for you to brush your teeth. You can do this with anything, and it becomes as automatic as brushing. Put better stuff in your zombie state from the time you wake up when you're still groggy. Don't have a coffee. Don't go watch porn or whatever you do, but instantly put better and better stuff there, like running. The scene from Rocky where Sylvester Stallone wakes up and starts running immediately, just like, within like 90 seconds after drinking that cup of eggs. He got that from Ali. You can do anything and it can become addictive and become gamified. You can release dopamine. Control that zombie state in the morning. Number 2, trigger the gamma. Only traffic and high traffic ideas, high traffic thoughts, high frequency thoughts, and activate it as soon as you can from waking up. Let that drive you, collect wins, build momentum, 1 million pieces to get momentum and build it. If you think you're far away from a goal, break that goal up into 1 million pieces. Making a phone call is impossible because I'd rather watch Netflix or whatever, right? Break up making a phone call into 1 million pieces and then see how much momentum you could pick up, because you could pick up 1,000 pieces like it's nothing. Just looking at your phone is like 500,000 pieces, right? Imagine the best outcomes constantly. This is the most important thing to fill your mind with, is don't think about what's the most insane thing. Like somebody just gave you $1 billion. Think about that. Go into these conversations assuming and expecting and demanding the best possible outcomes. For even the most insignificant interactions, focus on collapsing the wave on your ideal outcome. Remember, everything's a probability wave. There's like 5 or 10, 15, 10,000 different things that could happen. Focus on the one you want to happen and send that ripple out in the field, right? High frequency. As soon as possible, start using the words and thoughts that we talked about before, your mission, your hook. Start using high frequency thoughts as soon as you can in your conversations. When you're talking to people, say, you know what? The thing is, I don't know if you're familiar with the multiverse theory. It's like this idea that there's trillions of other versions of this. And I always think when I talk to somebody, if they're a constant or a variable. And if we were a constant, let's say that there's trillions of versions of you and I, and we always meet each other, how would this conversation go differently? What would have to happen at the end of this for you to say, you know what? If I live 100 different lives, I met that guy every time because he was so helpful to me in blank. What would that be, right? Just throwing that out there is it raises the frequency, right, of each conversation. Realize frequency is contagious. All energy is contagious, right? Everything is energy. Everything is contagious. Make sure you're raising your own frequency and that of others. And also, when you say a hook correctly and someone says it to somebody else, they're raising their frequency. It's like a game of telephone. That's what we do. Those 3 things to do. The most important stuff to take away from this class: raise your own frequency, raise it for other people, and then help other people raise it for other people. The more you So send that ripple out, the ideal outcome. The more attention you pay to it, the easier it becomes to think about, the more other like frequencies are attracted to it from yourself and from other people. And the more you'll see that evidence in the real world, it will find you. NAMBLA. I had a guy, a lease option guy, true story. It's totally crazy. This is a true thing. NAMBLA, North American Man-Boy Love Association, was a house in Fishers. I got a call from the sheriff's office saying, do you know that these NAMBLA people are meeting at your house? There's like 50 to 100 NAMBLA people meeting at your house every week. And I was like, what? This guy, it was a lease option buyer. So I talked to him. And I was like, how are you finding, there are these people, I'm not making this up. This is a true thing, man. This is a real organization, North American Man-Boy Love Association. I know it sounds like I'm making it up. I'm not. These people think that like the child molesting laws are too strict. No joke. That we should be able, it's bonkers, man. But he looks like a normal guy. And the other people, you think they look like the, 5-inch thick glasses and the raper mustaches and they drive the white vans with no windows. No, that's not that. They're like normal people. And I said, man, from a marketing standpoint, I talked to him. I said, how do you have 50 to 100 people showing up to your house every week to talk about this? How did you find this many child molesters? Like, how could you do that? And he said, they're everywhere. He's like, I was like, where would you go? Like, is there some place that, and he's like, it's everywhere. He's like, it's just at the grocery store. It's that, I was like, okay, so pick this one guy. I was like, you met this guy at the grocery store. What did you say when you saw him? And he's like, you just know, Azim. They're everywhere. And when he said they're everywhere, I was like, wow. And I thought, you know what? When you're a certain way, you pick up on people that are that certain way. You can just pick them out of a crowd, right? And I said, I guess when you really want to find something, I know he said, you know, Oz, when you really want to find something, I said, you'll find it. And he said, it'll find you. And I was like, wow. And I knew I'd remember that for the rest of my life. It'll find you. That's what this is, right? When you're really filled with something, you got the right frequency, you'll find it in the world, but it'll find you as well. You're getting it out there. You're sending that ripple out in this ocean. Create time dilation, set records, go through the wind cycle, and open time now. Have a wind sheet, a progress paper. I have that progress paper over there I used for my weight loss when I did. I still have it, but we also have that up for that sheet there shows how much time she was on her screen time, like her iPhone, and she wanted to reduce the time on her iPhone, and she wanted to increase the amount of miles she was walking, the amount of steps she was taking. That's what those two things are. It says there, you can read it on that sheet. It says how much time I spent on my phone, how much time I spent walking. When I had my weight loss thing, I just have, everyone that does this, put some progress on it. If you're bench pressing, write down how much weight you're doing every single day. Put it on a piece of paper that you put somewhere visibly. People will look at it and they'll be inspired by it. How cool is that? They look at it and you're raising their frequency without you even saying a word. Just by looking at it, they can tell this is how much weight you lost. Oh, I see. If you lose a pound to a pound and a half a day, 90 days, you lose 100 pounds, right? And you can do this, create that time dilation, because now you're experiencing more in those days. Every day is different because you have a new win, but also you're creating this thing that actually raises people's frequency up. Just take a picture of that list of numbers and people read it and they're like, oh man, that's crazy. That's really cool, because they know what you're doing with it. 5, exercise. Don't sit after eating. Try going vegan. I know this is crazy. It's like asking too much for a lot of people. Try going through it. Make your body, this is one sentence. This is the whole point of this. Make your body look like you're grateful for it. 6, volunteer, speak in hooks, work with people, work with people, helping them, build your fan base formula, make friends, keep in touch with them, help them. 77s, the great experiment model. This is the big experiment that we're doing, the big idea. We take this idea that we're actually tracking karma, where if you go out, put out an input, do nothing but just help. This idea with this field, right? If this is real, or not if that's real, but if this idea of time dilation is real, and if the field itself is unlimited, your field that you're creating with your thoughts, if you went out and did something to help people, that would send that ripple out and it would somehow find its way back to you. This is now we have people, this experiment we're doing now, just go out and do nothing else but just volunteer. Don't even try to build your business on your own, and see what kind of amazing things come into your life as a result of going out and volunteering. If you've seen some of the stories and the second part of the book, they're pretty amazing. Just going out and volunteering. Just go, you do nothing else at this entire class, just go out and volunteer and see what difference it makes in your life. Now that's kind of weird because you should volunteer because it's its own reward. I agree. However, because this experiment, we're tracking the return on this great cloud. Imagine a bank account that gives you back 10 times what you put into it, but the way to make a deposit is to help somebody. 7, rad, repetition, accountability, discipline. Constantly practice your dialogue, internal. Double a company once a month. Pick a company that you like, somebody you like. Just go and see what you can do to double their business. If nothing else, it gets their frequency in the right place. Ask yourself, when you're done talking, look at someone, look at the effect you have on them. Has their frequency changed? Has it gone higher or lower? Control is not, that's the same thing. All right, you got all this, right? You know all this by the time we're done. We said we'd go over this. The double slit experiment, wave, duality, particle, ice cube, other dimensions. That was the same thing with the neutrinos. They tracked, the reason they go under ice is because the water changes the speed of light. So they're able, this is on the AP, does anything travel faster than the speed of light? That's why they go underwater at the South Pole, because it's the largest solid in the world, where it's that 1 kilometer thick ice cube thing. It's a cube of ice that's 1 kilometer thick. And they sent all those sensors down there. So when the neutrinos go through it, they about twice a month, I think it's like twice or once a month, once every 2 months or something like that, they hit a neutrino hits something. And since it's going so fast and light goes slower in water, it creates a blue spark. And then they track, they measure, they have all these like 5,000 sensors in that 1 kilometer thing. And so technically, something does go faster than the speed of light because the speed of light's a little bit slower. And because the neutrinos are so small, they have like no mass, they don't run into anything. That's what creates. So they answer that AP question, does anything travel faster than the speed of light? Technically, a neutrino underwater through checkoff radiation actually does. Cataloging neurofeedback, neuroplasticity. We talk about the different gamma rays, beta, theta, alpha, beta, or delta, theta, alpha, beta, and gamma, and what they mean, each one. We talked about, okay, so the marshmallow experiment is basically the same thing as the time. The ability, if you get 1 marshmallow an hour, 2 if you wait. If you wait, you get 2, the delayed gratification. That's the time octopus. If you're willing to put off that initial pain or go through that initial quote unquote pain, the measurements that these people had, the results they had in life were improved across the board. Okay, so we've talked about a lot of this stuff, like attracts like. Your thoughts are alive, use them carefully. You guys, this is a whole bunch of stuff we talked about. This is getting crazy, man. We should have taken a break. You guys are soldiers, man. I love you guys. Okay, is there any other questions or anything? Everything we talked about, 100%. We can have a totally test on everything we talked about. Totally clean everything. It all makes sense. You guys are beautiful and great. I love you guys. All right, thank you so much, guys. If there's anything you need, please let us know. We'll make sure you go to bigria.com. If you have any questions or anything, text her first, 317-969-5619. Anna actually does answer the phone, but text her with any questions. We're getting all kinds of great stuff, you guys. Hopefully this makes sense. This is clear if we put this up at all. Love you guys. Thank you so much. We're good. All right, thanks, guys. We'll talk soon. Thanks.